I'm looking for Jack Beam. 4 words from a billionaire's mouth, and every lie Cheryl had told for 6 years was about to die in front of 300 people. The man on Forbes cover's Jerry Arnold, tech CEO, worth more than everyone in this school gymnasium combined, was asking for her son. The son he didn't know he had. The boy who came home yesterday with a split lip from bullies who called him a liar for saying his dad existed, and now his dad was here, in the flesh, asking for him by name. Cheryl had 7 years to prepare for this moment. 7 years of unsent letters, unpaid child support she never requested, and a secret she swore she'd take to her grave. But secrets don't stay buried when they see their own face in a newspaper photo of a bullied child. Cheryl Beam never forgot the day her 6-year-old son Jack came home with a split lip and a trembling voice that broke something inside her she didn't know could break anymore. "Mom," they said, "I don't have a real dad." She had knelt right there in their small apartment entryway, not caring about the groceries still in her hands or the door still hanging open. She'd cupped his small face so much smaller than it should feel at 6 years old, and brushed away tears she wished she could absorb into her own body so he'd never have to cry them. The blood on his lip was already drying, crusty and dark, but the wound in his eyes was fresh, raw, the kind that doesn't heal with band-aids and ice packs. Other mothers worried about scraped knees and lost homework folders. Cheryl worried about the question her son would eventually ask, the one she'd been dreading since the day she first held him, the question that had no good answer. "You have me," she'd whispered, smoothing his dark hair back from his forehead the way she'd done since he was an infant. "And that's real enough." But even as she said it, even as she pulled him close and felt his small body shake with sobs he was trying so hard to swallow, Cheryl knew the truth. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Because love, even fierce, all-consuming, sacrifice everything love, couldn't fill the hole left by absence. Jack did have a father who never knew he existed, a father who now ran one of the most powerful tech companies in the country, whose face appeared on magazine covers with headlines like, "The Genius Who Changed Everything," and "Arnold's Empire, How One Man Disrupted an Industry." A father named Jerry Arnold. And today, 2 years after that first split lip, 6 years of Cheryl carrying this secret like stones in her pockets, the world was about to force that truth into the light, whether she was ready or not. The gymnasium smelled like floor wax, and the particular brand of nervous energy that comes from cramming 300 people, parents, teachers, and kids onto metal bleachers designed for half that many. Cheryl stood in the back, half hidden behind a support pillar, watching Jack sit alone in the front row of students. His shoulders were hunched forward, the way they always were now, like he was trying to fold himself small enough to disappear, to become invisible to the boys who made his life miserable. It hadn't always been this way. When Jack was 4, he'd been loud, confident, the kind of kid who asked questions constantly and believed adults when they said he could be anything. But 6 years of, "Where's your dad?" and "Why doesn't your father come to things?" had taught him that taking up space meant inviting pain. So he'd learned to make himself smaller. Behind him, Wilder Morgan leaned close to his friend Ruiz, and even from 30 feet away, Cheryl could read their lips. She'd gotten good at reading cruelty from a distance. "Your dad must be imaginary," Wilder said, loud enough that the 3 kids around them turned to look. Ruiz snickered, that particular brand of childhood cruelty that feels like a knife between ribs, or he ran away. Who wouldn't? The laughter that followed made Jack's ears turn red, made his small hands curl into fists in his lap, made Cheryl's fingernails dig crescents into her palms, so deep she'd find the marks hours later. She'd complained to the principal, twice. Nothing changed. "Boys will be boys," they'd said, like cruelty was just part of growing up. "He needs to learn to stand up for himself," they'd suggested, like a child could fight absence with words, as if Jack could defend himself against a ghost. The principal was mid-sentence about this year's academic achievements, something about reading levels and standardized test scores that nobody was really listening to when the double doors at the back of the gymnasium swung open, hard, deliberate. The sound echoed. A tall man stepped inside. Navy suit that fit like it had been made specifically for his body, because it probably had been. Broad shoulders that filled doorways. A jawline that could have been carved from marble by someone who understood power. He moved with the kind of quiet authority that pulled every eye in the room toward him without him saying a single word. The kind of presence you couldn't ignore even if you tried. Cheryl's heart stopped. Just stopped. Like her body had forgotten how hearts were supposed to work. No. Not possible. Not here. Not now. Whispers rippled through the bleachers like wind through leaves. That particular sound of 300 people trying to talk quietly and failing completely. Is that? It can't be. Oh my God. That's Jerry Arnold. The Jerry Arnold? What's he doing here? The name hit Cheryl like a physical blow, like someone had reached into her chest and squeezed. 7 years of silence. 7 years of raising their son alone while Jerry built his empire and never looked back. 7 years of convincing herself this moment would never come, that he'd never find out, that she could protect Jack from this particular brand of disappointment forever. And now he was here, walking through her son's school gymnasium like he had every right to be there. Jerry didn't look at the parents. Didn't acknowledge the whispers or the phones being pulled from pockets to photograph him. His eyes scanned the rows of students with laser focus until they locked on one small figure in the front row. Jack. Cheryl watched her son's back stiffen. Watched him sense the shift in the room the way animals sense storms coming. That particular awareness children develop when they've learned that attention usually means pain. Then Jerry spoke, and his voice carried across the gym with the same confidence that had once convinced investors to bet millions on his vision. "Excuse me," he cleared his throat, and even the principal fell silent mid-word. "I'm looking for a student named Jack Beam." The entire gymnasium went silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, not a breath. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Jack's head turned slowly, like he wasn't sure he'd heard his own name. Like maybe if he moved too fast, this moment would shatter, and he'd discover it was just another dream where someone finally came looking for him. His eyes found Jerry, this tall stranger, in an expensive suit, who looked like he belonged in boardrooms, not elementary school gyms, and confusion flickered across his small face. But what froze Cheryl's blood, what made her press her hand over her mouth to stop the sound trying to escape, wasn't the confusion. It was the resemblance. The same dark hair that refused to lie flat no matter how much water you used. The same stubborn set to the jaw that made defiance look natural. The same wide eyes that seemed too old for the face they sat in, like they'd seen more than they should have. Every parent in that room could see it now. The DNA announcing itself across 30 feet of gymnasium floor. Undeniable and absolute. This wasn't speculation. This was fact. Written in bone structure and eye color and the way they both tilted their heads slightly when confused. Wilder and Ruiz had gone pale. Their mouths hung open in identical expressions of shock. All their cruel certainty evaporated in an instant. The principal stammered, his carefully rehearsed speech forgotten. Mr. Arnold, we weren't expecting, we had no idea you'd be. Is Jack Beam here?" Jerry's voice was steady, but Cheryl could hear the tremor underneath if you knew how to listen. The fear hiding behind the billionaire mask. She'd heard that fear before, 7 years ago, when he'd told her he wasn't ready to be tied down, when he'd chosen potential over presence. Jack rose from his seat slowly, his knees shaking so badly Cheryl could see it from across the gym. His voice came out small, uncertain. The voice of a boy who'd spent his whole life being told he wasn't enough. I'm Jack. And Jerry, this man who commanded boardrooms, who'd been interviewed by every major publication, who'd given TED Talks to thousands, looked at this small boy and couldn't find words. He took 3 steps forward, then stopped, like he didn't trust himself to get closer. Like if he moved too fast, the moment would shatter into pieces he couldn't put back together. Jack. He said the name like he was testing the weight of it on his tongue. Like he'd waited his whole life to say it out loud, and was terrified he'd pronounce it wrong. His voice cracked, actually cracked. The billionaire CEO who commanded attention and respect from world leaders looked at this child and couldn't complete a sentence. From the back of the gym, hidden behind her pillar, Cheryl covered her mouth with both hands. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of all these people who would talk and speculate and turn their lives into gossip fodder over coffee and carpool lines. Jack's voice was barely a whisper, but in the absolute silence of the gym, everyone heard it. "Do I know you?" And Jerry looked at this boy, this child, who carried his face and his DNA, and 6 years of questions no one had answered, and something inside him cracked wide open, something that had been sealed shut for 7 years, split apart. "Not yet," Jerry said softly, And there was a universe of regret in those two words. But I'd like you to. The gym erupted, parents whispering urgently to each other. Phones recording, capturing this moment for social media posts and group chats. The principal, trying desperately to regain control of his assembly. Teachers exchanging shocked glances. Children confused by adult reactions they didn't understand. But Cheryl couldn't hear any of it. All she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears like drums announcing the end of everything she'd carefully built. And Jack's small voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Mom?" He'd found her in the crowd. His eyes were wide and scared, and full of questions she'd spent 6 years trying to avoid. Questions she'd prayed he wouldn't ask until he was older, stronger, better equipped to handle complicated truths. "Mom, why is he here?" Cheryl stepped out from behind the pillar on legs that didn't feel entirely solid. Every eye in the gymnasium turned to her. She felt their judgment like physical weight, the speculation, the condemnation, the curiosity. Jerry's head snapped toward her. Their eyes met across the gymnasium, across 7 years of silence and regret, and words they'd never said. His face went white, then red, then white again, color draining like someone had pulled a plug. "Cheryl," he breathed, and the way he said her name carried 7 years of everything they'd never resolved. She didn't answer, couldn't answer, because what could she possibly say that would make sense of this moment? How could she explain to her son that the man standing in the middle of the gym, looking at him like he'd just discovered the missing piece of himself, was the same man who'd chosen his company over their family before Jack even existed? How could she tell him that his father, the one he'd cried about not having, the one he'd invented stories about to tell kids at school, the one whose absence had shaped every single day of his life, had been alive this whole time, building empires while Jack built walls around his heart? The principal was talking. Parents were staring. Phones were recording. But all Cheryl could see was her son's face confusion giving way to something that looked dangerously like hope. And hope was the most dangerous thing she could let him feel. Because hope meant expectations. And expectations meant disappointment. And Jack had already been disappointed enough for one lifetime. She'd built their life specifically to protect him from more. Jerry was walking toward them now. Slow steps, careful, like he was approaching something wild that might bolt if he moved too quickly. "Cheryl," he said again when he reached her, and his voice was raw in a way she'd never heard before. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't. Not here." Her voice came out sharp, protective. The voice of a mother who'd fought too many battles alone to let anyone, even him, especially him, disrupt the fragile peace she'd built for her son. Not in front of everyone. But it was too late for that. Everyone had already seen. Everyone already knew. The secret she'd kept for 6 years had just been exposed in front of 300 witnesses, with smartphones and social media accounts. By tonight, this would be everywhere. By tomorrow, reporters would be calling. By next week, their quiet life would be permanently shattered. Jack stood between them, looking up at Jerry with an expression Cheryl had never seen before. Not quite trust, not quite fear. Something in between. Something that looked like a boy seeing his own future for the first time and not knowing if he wanted it. "Are you really?" Jack's voice cracked. He swallowed hard, gathered courage, tried again. "Did you really come here for me?" And Jerry Arnold, the man who'd given speeches to thousands, who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, who'd stood on stages and commanded rooms with nothing but his presence, dropped to one knee in the middle of a school gymnasium and looked his son in the eyes for the first time. "Yes," he said simply, and the single word carried more weight than any speech he'd ever given. "I came for you." Now, here's something you need to understand about moments like this. We spend our whole lives thinking we know what we want. Success, money, recognition. We chase those things like they're the answer. But then something happens. Someone walks into a room, and you realize everything you built means nothing compared to what you almost lost. If stories about second chances speak to you about people finally understanding what actually matters, go ahead and subscribe. Because this is just the beginning. And what happens next? It's going to show you exactly what a man does when he realizes he's been chasing the wrong thing for 7 years. The principal's voice faded into background noise. Parents were still staring, phones still recording, whispers still spreading like wildfire. But Cheryl couldn't stay in that gymnasium another second. She grabbed Jack's hand too tight, she knew. But she couldn't let go, couldn't risk him slipping away in this chaos, and pulled him toward the side exit. "We're leaving," she said to no one in particular. Jerry stood up from his kneeling position, his expensive suit creasing at the knees. "Cheryl, wait." But she was already pushing through the door, Jack stumbling beside her, his face a mixture of confusion and something that looked dangerously close to excitement. That excitement terrified her more than anything else. Because excitement meant hope, and hope meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain when things inevitably fell apart. The hallway was empty. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects. Jack's sneakers squeaked against the linoleum as she led him toward the front entrance, her breath coming too fast, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape her body. The door behind them opened. She didn't have to turn around to know it was him. She could feel his presence, the way you feel a storm approaching, that shift in the air pressure, that electric charge that made the hairs on your arms stand up and your body prepare for impact. "Cheryl, please." His voice was closer now, right behind them. "Just give me 5 minutes." She stopped walking. Her hand was still gripping Jack's, but she could feel him trying to look back, trying to see the man who just claimed to be his father. "Jack," she said quietly, kneeling down to his level so she could look him in the eyes. "I need you to wait in the office for me. Tell Mrs. Henderson I'll be right there." "But Mom." "Now, baby. Please." Something in her voice, some edge of desperation he'd learned to recognize over 6 years of just the two of them, made him obey. He walked toward the office with reluctant steps, glancing back over his shoulder every few feet until he disappeared around the corner. The moment he was out of sight, Cheryl turned on Jerry, and all the anger she'd buried for 7 years came roaring up like a wildfire that had been waiting for oxygen. 5 minutes? Her voice was low, deadly calm. The kind of calm that came before explosions, the kind that was more terrifying than shouting. "You want 5 minutes? After 7 years of silence, you think you're entitled to 5 minutes?" Jerry's face was pale. Up close, she could see the years had changed him gray at his temples now. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. A weariness in his expression that money couldn't fix. But those eyes were the same. Still that deep brown that had once made her believe in forever. "I didn't know," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "Cheryl, I swear to God, I didn't know about Jack. You didn't know because you didn't want to know." The words came out sharper than she intended, but 7 years of carrying this alone had edges that cut. "You didn't answer your phone. You didn't read my messages. You were too busy building your empire to notice that you'd left something behind. That's not fair." "Fair?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it, just bitterness, aged like wine. "You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you about fair, Jerry." And just like that, the years collapsed. The memories she'd kept locked away, carefully sealed in boxes she never opened, came flooding back, vivid and painful as fresh wounds. They'd met in a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday afternoon 8 years ago. She was 22, working 2 jobs and taking night classes, her laptop balanced on her knees as she typed an essay on postmodern literature she didn't really understand, but desperately needed to pass. He was 23, hunched over a notebook filled with diagrams and code she couldn't decipher. His dark hair sticking up in 17 different directions because he kept running his hands through it every time he got stuck on a problem. Their eyes had met over the espresso machine. He'd smiled, nervous, genuine, real. Not the polished smile she'd seen in magazines later, but something raw and unguarded. Something that felt like truth. "You look like you're drowning in that paper," he'd said, gesturing to her screen filled with half-formed sentences and academic jargon. "You look like you're trying to solve world hunger with a ballpoint pen," she'd replied. Nodding at his notebook covered in crossed-out equations, he'd laughed, moved to her table without asking permission, just assuming she'd want his company. Started explaining his idea for a software platform that would revolutionize how small businesses managed their operations. She'd listened, charmed by his passion, by the way his hands moved when he talked about things he cared about, by the light in his eyes that made everything seem possible. Within 3 months, they were inseparable. Within 6 months, she was in love. Within a year, she'd convinced herself they were building a future together. But Jerry's startup consumed him, like fire consumes oxygen completely, relentlessly, leaving nothing behind but ash. Every conversation became about funding rounds and investor meetings. Every date got canceled for networking events with people whose names appeared in Forbes. Every promise of, "soon I'll have more time," turned into another month of barely seeing him, of competing with code and conferences, and the all-consuming hunger for success. "I just need to get through this phase," he'd say, kissing her forehead at 2 a.m. when he finally came to bed, his body there, but his mind still at the office. "Once we secure Series A funding, everything will calm down." But it never calmed down. Success just created more demands, more meetings, more reasons why he couldn't be present in the moment. And then she'd seen the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, and her entire world had tilted sideways. She'd tried to tell him. God, she'd tried. She'd called 17 times in 2 days, left voicemails that started confident and ended desperate. Sent texts that went from, "we need to talk," to, "please Jerry, it's important," to finally, at 3 a.m. on the 3rd day, "I'm pregnant." But he was in San Francisco that week, pitching to venture capitalists who held his dreams in their checkbooks. Her messages went unanswered. Her calls went to voicemail. Her world was imploding while his was expanding. When he finally called back 3 days later, 3 days she'd spent alternating between panic and rage, and a grief so profound it felt like drowning. She could hear the exhaustion in his voice before he even said hello. "Cheryl, hey, I'm sorry. It's been insane. Jerry, I need to tell you something." Her hands were shaking as she held the phone, the pregnancy test still sitting on her bathroom counter like evidence of a crime. Listen, can this wait?" His voice was distracted, and she could hear people talking in the background, the ambient noise of a busy restaurant or hotel lobby. "I'm about to walk into the most important meeting of my life. The investors are ready to sign, but they want one more pitch, and if I nail this, we're golden. We're actually going to make it, Cheryl. Everything we've worked for, Jerry. I promise I'll call you back tonight. We'll talk about whatever it is, but right now, I really need to focus. You understand, right? You always understand." The hope in his voice, the pleading, the automatic assumption that she would always understand, always wait, always be there when he finally had time for her. Something inside her had broken in that moment, snapped clean through. "Yeah," she'd whispered, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. "I understand." She'd hung up, stared at the phone. Waited for him to call back that night like he'd promised. He hadn't. Not that night. Not the next day. Not for 2 weeks, when he finally reached out with a text, "Sorry, got buried in paperwork. Everything good?" And she'd stared at that text, "Everything good?" while carrying his child and facing the biggest decision of her life alone. And she'd realized something that changed everything. He didn't want to know. On some level, Jerry had chosen to be unavailable, had chosen to be so consumed by his work that nothing else could reach him, had chosen his future over hers. So she'd stopped trying. Because what was the point of telling a man about his child when he'd already made it clear what his priorities were? The years that followed were a blur of survival. Working double shifts while pregnant, her feet swelling so badly she had to cut slits in her shoes. Crying in bathroom stalls during her lunch breaks because the exhaustion was so overwhelming she couldn't see straight. Giving birth alone because her mother was dead, and her father had written her off years ago when she dropped out of college to work full-time. Holding Jack in the hospital at 3 a.m. This tiny, perfect human who deserved so much more than she could give him, and making a promise that she'd be enough. Somehow, she'd be enough. She'd watched Jerry's rise from a distance, like watching a train you deliberately missed. Saw his company's valuation skyrocket, from millions to billions. Saw his face on magazine covers with headlines calling him a visionary, a genius, the future of tech. Saw him at charity galas, with different women on his arm, none of them staying long enough to matter, none of them seeming to leave an impression. He'd gotten everything he wanted. Built his empire, achieved his dreams. And she'd gotten Jack, who was more than enough, who had to be enough, because he was all she had. But Jerry's world was champagne and crystal glasses and penthouse views, while hers was generic macaroni and cheese stretched across 4 dinners and hoping the car would start one more time so she could get to work. Now, standing in this empty school hallway with 7 years between them, watching him look at her like she'd stolen something that belonged to him, the anger she'd buried came roaring back. I tried to tell you, she said, her voice shaking with the effort of staying calm. I tried, Jerry, but you were too busy becoming the man everyone else needed you to be the man I needed you to be. I would have, he stopped, running his hand through his hair the way he always did when he was overwhelmed. Some habits never died. If I'd known, I would have. Would have what? Given up your dreams? Resented me? Resented him? She shook her head. You made your choice. I made mine. And we survived. That's not fair to Jack. Don't you dare. Her voice dropped to something dangerous, something with teeth. Don't you dare stand there and tell me what's fair to my son. Where were you when he came home crying because kids said he didn't have a real dad? Where were you when he asked me why everyone else's father showed up to school events, except his? Where were you when he was 6 years old with a split lip asking me what he did wrong to make his father not want him? I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't want to be found. The words exploded out of her, years of restraint finally breaking. You built a billion-dollar company. You think I couldn't have tracked you down if I wanted to? You think I couldn't have shown up at one of your fancy galas with a 6-year-old who has your face and demanded child support? You think I didn't know exactly where to find you? Jerry went silent. She watched the realization dawn on his face that she'd chosen not to disrupt his life the same way he'd chosen not to be in hers. Then why didn't you? His voice was barely a whisper. Because I didn't want him growing up thinking his father saw him as an obligation. The truth hurt to say out loud, tasted like failure. I didn't want him feeling like a mistake that had to be managed, Jerry. So I let you have your empire, and I built a life where he felt wanted, where he felt loved, where he was enough, even without you. And today, Jerry's eyes were red now, and something about seeing him close to tears made her own eyes burn. What changed? Why am I here? This morning I saw a news article. His voice broke, about a boy being bullied for not having a father. And the picture. He stopped, pressing his palm against his chest like he was trying to hold his heart in place. The picture was him. My face staring back at me. My eyes. He couldn't finish. Couldn't find words for what it felt like to discover your child existed through a news article about him being tormented. I didn't even know his name, but I knew, Jerry continued, his voice raw. I knew he was mine. I've looked at my own face in the mirror every day for 38 years, and there he was. This boy I'd never met, who had my chin, my eyes, my everything. And he was hurting, and I wasn't there. Cheryl felt something crack inside her, because that was the thing about Jerry. He'd always felt things too deeply, even when he was terrible at showing it, even when he buried it under ambition and work and the relentless pursuit of more. So, you decided to show up at his school? She shook her head. In front of everyone? Without warning? Without thinking about what that would do to him? I panicked. He looked at her, and for a moment, she saw the 23-year-old in the coffee shop again, lost, overwhelmed, trying to do the right thing, and failing spectacularly. I saw his face, and thought, I have a son. I have a son, and he's being hurt, and I wasn't there to protect him. I had to see him. Had to make sure he was real. Well, now you've seen him. Cheryl's voice was cold, protective, the voice of a mother who'd spent 6 years building walls to keep her son safe. And now, you can leave. Cheryl, no. She held up her hand. You don't get to walk in and out of his life. Not again. You left once, and it nearly destroyed me. But I survived. I built something good for him. And I will not let you disrupt that just because you suddenly developed a conscience. I'm not leaving. Jerry's voice was firm now. Certain. I know I don't have the right to be here. I know I don't deserve him, but he's my son, Cheryl. And I've already missed 6 years. I'm not missing another day. They stood there in the hallway, 7 years of hurt and regret and love that had never fully died, hanging between them like smoke you could almost see. From the office, she could hear Jack's voice, asking Mrs. Henderson a question. Her son. Her beautiful, brave, broken boy, who'd spent his whole life wondering why he wasn't enough for his father to stay. And now, that father was here. Saying the words she'd once dreamed of hearing. Making promises she desperately wanted to believe. But dreams were dangerous things, and hope was even more dangerous. She looked at Jerry, really looked at him and saw something she hadn't expected. Desperation. Not the entitled kind that came from being denied something you wanted, but the raw, honest kind that came from finally understanding what you'd lost and being willing to do anything to get it back. "You don't get to walk in and out of his life," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not again." Jerry opened his mouth to respond, but the words died on his lips. Because standing 15 feet away, pressed against the wall near the office door, where he'd clearly been hiding and listening, was Jack. His small frame was rigid, his eyes were wide as saucers, and from the look on his face, that mixture of shock and betrayal and desperate, aching hope, it was clear he'd heard everything. Every word, every accusation, every truth they'd been trying to protect him from. "Jack," Cheryl's voice cracked. But Jack wasn't looking at her. He was staring at Jerry with an intensity that made the billionaire CEO take an involuntary step back. This child, his child, was looking at him the way people look at ghosts, like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing was real. Like one wrong move might make him disappear. "Are you?" Jack's voice was so small, it barely carried across the hallway. He swallowed hard, tried again, forcing the words out past the fear. "Are you really my dad?" The question hung in the air like a prayer, like everything in the world had stopped spinning just to hear the answer, like this single moment would define everything that came after. Jerry's throat worked. His hands were shaking, these hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts without trembling, that had shaken hands with presidents and tech giants, were shaking because a 6-year-old boy was asking him the most important question of his life. "Yes," the word came out rough, broken. If you'll have me." Something in Jack's face crumpled, not in a bad way. In the way dams crumble when the pressure behind them finally becomes too much. In the way defenses fall when they're no longer needed. His eyes filled with tears he was trying desperately not to let fall. Because 6-year-old boys, who got mocked for not having fathers, learned early not to cry where anyone could see. But one tear escaped anyway, rolled down his cheek, and Jerry felt something inside his chest shatter completely. Felt 7 years of careful control and emotional distance explode into nothing. "I didn't know about you," Jerry said, dropping to one knee again so he could look Jack in the eyes. So there would be no distance, no hierarchy, just truth between them. "I swear, Jack, if I'd known, I would have been there. I would have been there for everything." Jack wiped at his face with the back of his hand, the gesture so achingly young it made Cheryl's chest hurt. "Mom said you were too busy." The words were a knife. Simple, honest, devastating. Not an accusation, just a fact, the truth as Jack understood it. Jerry looked up at Cheryl, and she met his gaze without flinching. This was what his choices had cost. This moment right here, his son thinking he hadn't been wanted, thinking he hadn't been worth the time. "I was busy," Jerry admitted, his voice thick with regret. "But I was busy with the wrong things. I thought building a company was the most important thing I could do. I thought success meant more meetings, more money, more recognition." He looked back at Jack. "I was wrong. You're the most important thing, and I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry for every birthday I missed, every night you went to bed wondering where I was, every time someone asked about your dad and you didn't know what to say. I'm so sorry, Jack." Jack's lower lip trembled. "The kids at school say I'm lying when I tell them I have a dad. They say if I did, he'd be here." "What kids?" Jerry's voice changed, became sharper, protective in a way Cheryl had never heard before. The voice of a father learning what it meant to guard his child from harm. Jack glanced at his mother, uncertain if he should answer. She gave him a small nod. "Wilder and Ruiz," Jack whispered. "They're in my class. They say I'm making up stories because I'm weird, because I don't have a dad like everyone else." "What else do they say?" Jerry's jaw was tight, muscles jumping. "Jerry," Cheryl started, but he held up a hand. "What else, Jack?" The boy's voice got even smaller. So quiet, they had to lean in to hear. "They say Mom got pregnant and scared my dad away. They say that's why he left, because I wasn't good enough, because something's wrong with me." The hallway went very quiet. Somewhere down the corridor, a door closed. A phone rang in the office. But all Cheryl could hear was the sound of her son saying out loud the fear he'd been carrying for years. The lie he'd internalized. The wound that had been festering. Jerry's hands curled into fists, then uncurled, then curled again. She could see him trying to control himself. trying not to rage in front of Jack, trying to be the father this moment required instead of the man his anger wanted him to be. Jack, Jerry's voice was steady now, deliberately calm. Look at me. Jack looked up, and Cheryl saw her son's face open and vulnerable, and desperate to believe. None of that is true. None of it. Your mom didn't scare me away. I didn't know you existed, and that's my fault, not yours. Not your mom's. Mine. You hear me? This is on me. Not your mom, who's been incredible. And definitely not you. But you are good enough, Jack. You've always been good enough. And any man who had a son like you and walked away is a fool. He paused, and his voice dropped to something raw and honest. I was a fool, but I'm here now. And if you'll let me, I'd like to be your dad. Not just in name, but for real. Every day. For everything. Jack stood there, 6 years of pain and longing and hope warring on his face. Cheryl watched her son, this brave, broken boy who'd taught himself not to want what other children had, look at the father who'd finally found him. And she held her breath, waiting. Can you really do that? Jack asked. And the skepticism in his voice hurt worse than any accusation. Be my dad for real? Every day? I can try, Jerry said honestly. I'll probably mess up sometimes. I don't know how to be a dad yet. But I promise, I'll keep trying. Every single day. I promise I'll show up. I promise I'll be there. I promise you won't have to wonder anymore if you're wanted. Because you are, Jack. You are so wanted. Jack took one tentative step forward, then another. Then he was close enough to touch, and Jerry slowly, carefully, like Jack was made of glass, reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. The touch was electric. Father and son, connected for the first time. They're still inside, Jack said quietly, glancing back toward the gymnasium. Everyone who was watching, they're all talking about us. Jerry glanced at Cheryl, then back at Jack. Do you want to go back in there? Jack hesitated. Then something shifted in his expression, something that looked like courage finding its footing. Will you come with me? Yes. And will you tell them? The hope in his voice was painful to hear. That you're my dad, so they know I wasn't lying? Cheryl stepped forward, her instinct to protect kicking in. Jack. Baby. You don't have to. I want them to know. Jack's voice was suddenly firm, determined. I want Wilder and Ruiz to see. I want everyone to see. I want them to know I have a dad. That I'm not lying. That he came looking for me. Jerry looked at Cheryl over Jack's head. She could see the question in his eyes. Is this okay? Am I allowed to do this? She didn't know if it was okay. Didn't know if bringing Jerry into their lives would heal Jack or hurt him more in the long run. But her son was asking for this, asking for the validation he'd been denied his whole life, asking to be claimed publicly after 6 years of being invisible. And she'd spent 6 years trying to be enough, trying to fill a hole she couldn't fill alone. Maybe it was time to let Jerry try. She gave him a single nod. He stood up, his hand still on Jack's shoulder, and the three of them walked back toward the gymnasium together. The moment they stepped through the doors, the whispers started again. Louder this time, more pointed, more certain. Parents who'd returned to their seats after Jerry's dramatic entrance now leaned toward each other with phones still in hand, theories being whispered behind cupped palms that weren't as discreet as they thought. The principal was attempting to continue the assembly, but his voice faltered when he saw them return. The entire room's attention shifted like iron filings responding to a magnet. Jack's steps slowed. Cheryl felt him start to pull back, the courage wavering under the weight of all those stares, all that judgment. But Jerry's hand stayed firm on his shoulder. Walk with me, Jerry said quietly, just for Jack to hear. I've got you. They moved down the center aisle together, every eye tracking their progress like they were watching a play unfold. Cheryl stayed a few steps behind, watching her son walk beside his father for the first time, seeing the way Jerry shortened his stride to match Jack's pace, the way he kept his hand steady on Jack's shoulder, the way he didn't look at anyone else, just kept his attention on his son. In the front row, Wilder and Ruiz sat frozen, their faces pale, their earlier confidence evaporated like morning dew. Jerry stopped directly in front of them. The entire gymnasium held its breath. I believe you two know my son, Jerry said. His voice was calm, conversational. But there was steel underneath. The kind of quiet power that came from knowing you held all the cards. Jack beamed. Wilder's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. I understand there's been some confusion about Jack's family situation. Jerry's hand tightened slightly on Jack's shoulder. Not threatening, protective. Like a shield. So let me clarify. I'm Jerry Arnold, Jack's father. And I know I haven't been here before. And that's on me. But I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere. He turned slowly, addressing the entire room. Parents, teachers, students. Every single person who'd whispered and speculated and judged. My son is 6 years old. And from what I understand, he spent most of those years being told he didn't have a father, being mocked for something that wasn't his fault, being made to feel less than because of my absence. His voice rose slightly. Not a shout, but a command. Authority that demanded attention. That ends today. Right now. This moment. A woman in the third row gasped. Someone's phone camera flash went off, capturing this moment for posterity. Jerry continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the gym. Anyone who wants to bully him now, any child, any parent who wants to whisper about him or make him feel small, will have to go through me first. And I promise you, I'm very good at protecting what's mine, and I'm not going anywhere. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a single person moved. Not a breath was drawn. Even the younger children seemed to understand something significant was happening. Jack looked up at his father, and Cheryl saw something in her son's face she'd never seen before. Not just happiness, not just relief. Pride. Pure, unfiltered pride. He was proud. Proud to stand next to this man. Proud to be claimed. Proud to finally have an answer when people asked about his dad. Proud to be wanted publicly, loudly, in front of everyone who'd ever made him feel small. In the second row, a girl leaned toward her mother and whispered loudly, "That's Jack's dad?" The admiration in her voice was clear. He's really his dad. But in the back, Cheryl saw a few parents exchange looks, jealous, bitter looks, that said they resented this display, resented that their ordinary families were being upstaged by a billionaire's dramatic revelation. The principal cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Mr. Arnold, perhaps we could discuss this in my office." "We're leaving," Jerry said simply. He looked down at Jack. "Is that okay? If we leave, we can get lunch somewhere. Just the three of us. Talk properly." Jack nodded, still unable to speak, emotions too big for words. They walked back up the aisle together, Jerry's hand never leaving Jack's shoulder. Cheryl followed, her heart in her throat, watching every eye in the room track their movement, watching her son stand taller with each step. Outside, in the parking lot where the October sun was too bright after the dim gymnasium, they finally stopped. Jack was shaking, not from fear, from the release of 6 years of tension finally breaking free, from being seen, from being claimed, from mattering. Jerry knelt down one more time, and this time when he opened his arms, Jack stepped into them without hesitation, wrapped his small arms around his father's neck, and buried his face in his shoulder. "I've got you," Jerry whispered, his own voice breaking. "I've got you now. I promise." Cheryl watched them, her vision blurring with tears she couldn't hold back anymore. This was what Jack had needed, what he'd always needed. A father who chose him, who claimed him publicly, who made the world know he was wanted. After a long moment, Jerry looked up at her. His eyes were red, his face marked with the wet traces of Jack's tears soaking into his suit. "Please," he said, his voice breaking, "please, let me try to make this right." Cheryl looked at her son, still holding tight to his father. Looked at Jerry, this man who'd broken her heart but was now holding her son like he was the most precious thing in the world. She thought about the years of loneliness, the nights Jack cried himself to sleep, the questions she couldn't answer, the hole she couldn't fill no matter how hard she tried. And she thought about the look on Jack's face just now, that pride, that relief, that sense of finally being complete. "One chance," she heard herself say. "You get one chance, Jerry. You hurt him. And I will make sure you never see him again. Do you understand?" "One chance." Jerry nodded, his throat working. "I won't. I swear, Cheryl. I won't hurt him. I won't leave. I won't be too busy. I won't choose anything over him. Not ever again. She wasn't sure she believed him, wasn't sure she could trust him with the most important part of her world. But Jack was smiling now. Really smiling. The kind of smile she hadn't seen in years. The kind that came from deep inside, from a place that had finally stopped hurting. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth the risk. 3 days later, Jerry's black Mercedes pulled up outside a building that made his chest tighten with guilt so profound he could barely breathe. The apartment complex was old, not dangerous, but tired in the way things get when people care but don't have resources. Paint peeling near the gutters. A broken light fixture by the entrance that probably hadn't worked in months, maybe years. A playground with swings that had seen better decades, chains rusted but still functional. This was where his son lived. Where Cheryl had raised him alone, while Jerry slept in penthouses with floor-to-ceiling windows and complained about hotel thread counts. He sat in the car for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, trying to steady his breathing. His driver, John, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You okay, boss?" "No," Jerry said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." The apartment was on the 3rd floor, no elevator. Jerry climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a judgment. The hallway smelled like someone's dinner garlic and tomato sauce that reminded him of Sunday nights he'd never have with Jack. And a child's laughter echoed from behind one of the doors, the sound of a family he'd missed 6 years of building. Apartment 3C. The numbers were slightly crooked, like they'd been knocked loose, and someone had tried to fix them but didn't have the right tools. Even this small detail spoke of making do, of fixing what you could with what you had. He knocked, waited, heard footsteps inside, small ones running, then Cheryl's voice saying something he couldn't quite hear. Jack opened the door, and the smile that spread across his face made Jerry's throat close up. "You came," Jack said, like he'd half expected Jerry to forget. Like promises were things that got broken in his experience. "I promised, didn't I?" Jerry stepped inside, and the first thing that hit him was how small everything was. Not cramped, Cheryl had made it homey with careful placement and obvious love, but small in a way that spoke of careful budgeting and making do with what you had. Small in a way that made Jerry want to buy them a house immediately, and had to remind himself that throwing money at things wasn't the answer. The living room was barely bigger than his office bathroom. A worn couch that had been repaired with duct tape on one arm, silver tape that didn't match the brown fabric but did the job. A coffee table covered with Jack's homework and drawings, each one carefully done. A TV that was at least 10 years old, the kind that still had actual buttons on the front. But the walls were covered with photos, Jack at different ages, Jack with Cheryl, Jack's artwork carefully framed with dollar store frames that were slightly crooked but displayed with pride. This was a home built from love and resourcefulness when money ran short. Cheryl emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She'd agreed to this visit, but her body language was still guarded, still protective, still not entirely sure this was a good idea. 2 hours, she said. That's what we agreed. 2 hours, Jerry confirmed. Thank you for letting me. Don't thank me. This is for Jack. Her voice was firm. You're here on his schedule, not yours. Jerry nodded, understanding the boundary being set. Jack tugged at his sleeve, excitement overriding his earlier uncertainty. Want to see my room? The room was barely big enough for the twin bed and small desk crammed inside, but every inch had been maximized. Posters of planets covered one wall, Jupiter with its great red spot, Saturn with its magnificent rings, Mars with its rust-colored surface. A bookshelf held astronomy books from the library, the spines creased from repeated reading. Model rockets sat on the windowsill in various states of completion, some painted, some still bare plastic. You like space? Jerry asked, his voice rough with emotion. Yeah. Jack sat on the edge of his bed, suddenly shy now that they were alone. I want to be an astronaut someday. Or maybe design rockets. I haven't decided yet. Mom says I can be anything I want if I work hard enough. Jerry's heart cracked a little more. Because he designed software that ran on satellites orbiting Earth, and his son wanted to build the rockets that got them there. And they should have discovered this connection years ago. Should have been building model rockets together since Jack was old enough to hold glue. I could help you with that, Jerry said carefully, not wanting to overstep. If you want, I know some people at NASA and SpaceX. I could introduce you. Show you what goes into building rockets that actually fly. Jack's eyes went wide with hope and disbelief. Really? Really? We could visit. Take a tour. See real rockets being built. Would you like that? That would be. Jack couldn't find words big enough. That would be amazing. They spent the next hour on the floor of that tiny room. Jerry helping Jack work on a model rocket kit he'd been struggling with for weeks. Their hands worked side by side, Jerry's large and uncertain, Jack's small and eager. The boy asked questions about thrust ratios and fuel efficiency that were surprisingly sophisticated for a 6-year-old, and Jerry answered as best he could, amazed by how much his son already understood. For the first time in 7 years, Jerry felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. But then, Jack's phone buzzed with a message, and Jerry saw the boy's face change, saw the light dim, the smile fade. The walls go back up. What's wrong? Jerry asked, setting down the rocket piece he'd been holding. Jack hesitated, then showed him the screen. A group text from his class. Ruiz had written, "Heard Jack's dad, only showed up for good publicity. Bet he's gone by next week. LOL." Several other kids had responded with laughing emojis and comments. "My dad said rich guys only do charity when cameras are watching. Give it 2 weeks max. Fake dad for fake likes." Jerry felt rage bloom hot in his chest. Felt every protective instinct he didn't know he had surged to the surface. "Jack, it's okay." Jack's voice was too practiced at dismissing hurt. Too experienced at protecting himself from disappointment. "I'm used to it. It's not okay." Jerry set down the model rocket, gave Jack his full attention. "And you shouldn't have to be used to it. That's not how things should be." "But what if they're right?" Jack's voice cracked, and this was the fear underneath. The real terror. "What if you are just here for publicity? Everyone says rich people only do nice things if cameras are watching. What if you leave when people stop paying attention?" The words were a gut punch, because 3 days ago, before he'd seen his son's face in that news article, Jerry might have done exactly that kind of performative charity. Might have shown up for optics and left once the headlines faded. He'd done it before, written checks to causes he didn't care about because it was good for the company image. But not this. Not with Jack. This was different. This was real. "I'm not here for cameras," Jerry said firmly, taking Jack's hands in his. "I'm here because you're my son. And I should have been here 6 years ago. That's on me, not publicity, not optics. Just me being an idiot who didn't know what mattered." Jack wanted to believe him. Jerry could see it in his eyes, that desperate hope warring with practiced skepticism, with 6 years of evidence that good things didn't last. "How do I know?" Jack whispered. "You don't. Not yet." Jerry was honest because Jack deserved honesty. "But I'm going to show you, every day, until you believe it." After Jerry left, after promising to come back on Saturday, after seeing the cautious hope on Jack's face, Cheryl walked him to the door. "Give him time," she said quietly. "Trust doesn't come easy when you've learned not to expect it." Jerry nodded, but as he turned to leave, his foot caught on something under the couch. A shoebox, worn and faded, slid out from its hiding place, where it had clearly been for years. Cheryl froze. "Don't." But Jerry had already seen his name written on the side in Cheryl's handwriting. Saw the dates spanning 6 years. Saw the stack of envelopes inside, all addressed to him at his company's headquarters. All carefully sealed, all unsent. "Cheryl, what? Those are private." She moved to take the box, but Jerry was already opening the first letter, his hands shaking so badly he almost tore the envelope. "Dear Jerry, Jack took his first steps today. He was 9 months old, right on schedule according to the books. He walked from the couch to my arms 4 whole steps before he fell on his diaper-padded bottom. I cried. Happy tears, but also sad ones, because I wished you were here to see it. But you weren't, and you're not going to be, so I'm writing it down instead. Maybe someday I'll be brave enough to send these. Maybe someday you'll care. Cheryl." Jerry's vision blurred. He opened another letter with trembling hands. "Dear Jerry, Jack said his first word today. Mama, I should be happy, and I am. But all I can think about is that he'll never say da-da, because you're not here to hear it. The pediatrician asked about family medical history today. I had to say I don't know the father's background. She gave me that look, the one I'm getting used to seeing everywhere, the one that says, poor choice, poor girl. I didn't tell her that loving you wasn't a poor choice. Expecting you to love me back might have been, though. Cheryl. Another letter. Then another. 6 years of milestones documented in careful handwriting that got messier when she was clearly crying while writing. Jack's first day of school. His first loose tooth. The night he asked why he didn't have a daddy, and Cheryl had cried in the bathroom for an hour. The morning she worked 3 jobs in one day and came home so exhausted she fell asleep on the floor next to Jack's bed. Every letter was a dagger. Every word was evidence of a life he'd missed, a woman he'd abandoned, a child who'd grown up without him while he built empires and collected accolades and felt empty without knowing why. Why didn't you send them? Jerry's voice was barely above a whisper. If you wrote them, why didn't you mail them? Cheryl stood in her small kitchen doorway, arms crossed, face carefully neutral. But her eyes were wet, betraying the emotion she was trying to hide. Because you chose your life, Jerry. Her voice didn't waver, but he could hear the years of pain underneath. And I had to choose ours. I would have. What? Dropped everything? Abandoned your company? Resented us for ruining your dreams? She shook her head. I wrote those letters when I was weak. When I missed you so badly I couldn't breathe. When I convinced myself that maybe if you just knew, you'd care. But then I'd remember how you didn't answer my calls, how you didn't read my texts, how even when I finally told you I needed to talk about something important, you asked if it could wait because you had a meeting. Jerry's hands trembled holding the letters. You said you were pregnant. In one of your texts, I saw it when I finally went back through them. I did, and you didn't read it. You were too busy becoming successful, too busy changing the world. She took a shaky breath. So, I made a choice. I could spend the rest of my life chasing a man who'd already shown me I wasn't a priority. Or I could build a life where Jack felt wanted, where he knew without question that he was enough, that he was loved, that someone chose him first, every single time. He should have known me. The admission hurt. He should have. The agreement hurt worse than any accusation could have. But I couldn't give him a father who was there out of obligation, who showed up because he had to, not because he wanted to. I couldn't do that to him, Jerry. I couldn't let him spend his childhood feeling like a burden. Jerry looked down at the letters in his hands, years of love and pain and resilience he'd never witnessed. Evidence of Cheryl's strength and his weakness laid bare in blue ink on yellowing paper. I want to be here now, he said, his voice cracking. Not because I have to, not out of obligation or guilt, because I need to. Because that apartment I go home to feels empty, even though it cost $8 million. Because looking at spreadsheets and stock prices doesn't mean anything compared to building model rockets with my son. Wanting to be here and staying here are different things. Cheryl's voice was tired. So tired. Jack's already starting to hope, and hope is dangerous when you're 6 and everyone's told you your whole life that you're not worth staying for. Jerry carefully placed the letters back in the box like they were sacred artifacts. His hands were shaking so badly, he could barely control them. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he said quietly. I know I have no right to walk back into your lives after everything I missed, everything I chose not to see. But I'm begging you. Please don't shut me out. Let me prove I'm different now. Let me show Jack that he's worth everything, that he always was. Cheryl's composure finally cracked. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but her voice stayed steady through sheer force of will. You hurt me once, and I survived. I built a good life from the ashes of what we could have had. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much disappointment. But if you hurt him, Jerry, I will never forgive you. Never. Do you understand? He's already been hurt enough. And I will protect him from anyone who might hurt him more, even you. Especially you. I understand. Do you? She stepped closer, and he could smell her shampoo, something floral and cheap and heartbreakingly familiar. Because in 2 hours, you'll leave this apartment and go back to your penthouse and your life of luxury that I can't even imagine. And we'll still be here, in this small place, with secondhand furniture and duct-taped couches. And when Jack goes to school tomorrow and Ruiz tells him you're only pretending, he'll wonder if it's true. He'll watch the door on Saturday, hoping you show up but expecting you won't. That's what your absence taught him to expect: disappointment. The words were acid. Truth usually was. Jerry looked around the small apartment one more time, saw the duct-taped couch, the dollar store frames, the model rockets, built with birthday money carefully saved over months. This was what Cheryl had built from nothing. This was what strength looked like when no one was watching, and cameras weren't rolling. "I'll be here Saturday," he said quietly. "And every Saturday after. And whenever else he needs me. Every game, every event, every random Tuesday when he just wants to show me a drawing. All of it." He walked to the door, the weight of 6 years of unsent letters heavy in his chest like stones he'd carry forever. At the threshold, he turned back. "Cheryl?" She looked at him, her arms still crossed, her walls still up, but maybe, just maybe, with a few cracks showing. "Thank you," he said, "for loving him enough to protect him, even from me." She didn't respond, just nodded once, then closed the door softly behind him. Jerry stood in that dim hallway, listening to the sounds of other people's dinners and other people's laughter, and felt the full weight of what he'd lost. But more than that, he felt the weight of what he'd almost lost forever, what he might still lose if he failed now. Saturday, he promised himself. He'd be there Saturday, and he'd keep being there until Jack believed it. Until Cheryl trusted it. Until he'd earned back even a fraction of what his choices had cost them. The shoebox of letters haunted him all the way home. You know what gets me about this? It's those letters. All those moments she documented, all that pain she carried alone, all those milestones he missed because he was too busy building something that didn't matter as much as what he was losing. Sometimes we don't know what we have until we see it written down in someone else's handwriting. If you've ever had to carry something alone that should have been shared, if you've ever written words you were too afraid to send, hit that like button, because this story, it's about to show you what happens when someone finally does the work to earn back what they lost. Saturday came. Jerry showed up at 9 a.m. sharp, holding a bag from the hobby store containing advanced rocket building materials he'd researched all week, watching YouTube tutorials at midnight to understand what he was buying. Jack opened the door with a smile that made every sleepless night Jerry had spent worrying worth it. They spent 4 hours together that day, built 2 rockets from scratch, talked about thrust vectors and orbital mechanics in ways that made Jerry realize his son was genuinely brilliant. Ordered pizza that Jack declared way better than the frozen kind Mom usually gets, and then immediately looked guilty for saying. For 4 hours, Jerry felt like maybe, just maybe, he was getting this father thing right. But Monday came, and with it, the vultures circled with sharpened beaks. Jack walked into school that morning with his head held higher than usual. His dad had come back, had kept his promise, had spent the whole weekend with him, not because cameras were watching, but because he wanted to. The model rockets they'd built were proudly displayed on his shelf, evidence that this was real. Ruiz noticed immediately. "Look who's all happy today," Ruiz said loud enough for half the class to hear as they lined up for attendance. "Did your fake dad buy you something expensive to make up for abandoning you for 6 years?" Jack's spine stiffened. "He's not fake, and he didn't abandon me. He didn't know about me." "Right," Ruiz smirked, and the cruelty in that expression was practiced. "Learned from adults. That's what they all say. My mom saw the articles online. Everyone's talking about how Jerry Arnold suddenly discovered a kid right when his company's stock is dropping. Convenient timing, don't you think?" "That's not," Jack started, but Wilder cut him off. "My dad says rich people only do nice things for tax breaks and publicity," Wilder added, clearly repeating words he'd heard at home. "Says Arnold's probably getting some kind of benefit from claiming you, like a write-off or something." The words landed like punches. Jack felt his face heating up, his hands curling into fists at his sides, anger and hurt warring in his chest. "You don't know what you're talking about," Jack said, his voice shaking with emotion he was trying to control. "He's my dad. He came to see me because he wanted to. Because he cares. For now," Ruiz said with a cruel smile that suggested he was enjoying this. "But give it a few weeks. Once the news cycle moves on, so will he. Rich guys like that don't stick around for kids from places like yours. My mom says people like him live in a different world." Other kids were watching now. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight and avoiding eye contact. Others were nodding along, believing the poison being spread, and Jack felt the foundation he'd just started building crack beneath his feet. "He's not like that," Jack insisted, but even he could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. The doubt. "Prove it then," Ruiz challenged, crossing his arms. Have him come to the father-son baseball game next month. Oh wait, he'll probably be too busy with his important meetings by then. Or he'll send someone to make excuses for him. The laughter that followed Jack down the hallway felt like nails scraping across his heart. By lunch, the rumors had spread like wildfire through dry grass. Whispers followed him everywhere. Kids he didn't even know were talking about his publicity stunt dad. Someone had printed out an article analyzing Jerry's recent stock performance and company struggles, hanging it on the bulletin board with a note. Coincidence? I think not. Jack sat alone at lunch, staring at his sandwich, unable to eat. His stomach was twisted in knots. Everything Ruiz said was exactly what the small, scared part of Jack had been thinking. The part that remembered 6 years of absence. The part that knew how to protect itself by not hoping for too much. The part that whispered, "This is too good to be true." What if they were right? What if Jerry was only here because it looked good? What if the attention faded, and so did Jerry's interest? What if in a month, or a year, he was just another father who couldn't be bothered to show up? By the time the final bell rang, Jack had built walls so high around his heart that when Cheryl picked him up from school, she knew immediately something was catastrophically wrong. Baby, what happened? Nothing. Jack stared out the car window, jaw clenched. I'm fine. But he wasn't fine. And when they got home, he went straight to his room, without even grabbing the snack she'd prepared, his favorite cookies she'd baked that morning, specifically because she knew he loved them. Cheryl stood in the kitchen, staring at his closed door, a familiar dread settling in her stomach like lead. She'd seen Jack like this before, after particularly bad days at school, after watching other kids with their fathers at events, after birthday parties where he was the only one without a dad to bring along. She was about to knock on his door when she heard it. The sound of something being thrown, hard, against the wall with force that shook the picture frames in the hallway. She rushed down the hallway and opened the door without knocking, maternal instinct overriding courtesy. Jack stood in the middle of his room, his face red and streaked with tears he'd been holding back all day. The model rocket he and Jerry had built on Saturday lay shattered on the floor, pieces scattered like his composure, like his hope, like everything he'd started to believe in. Jack. I don't want to talk about it. His voice was raw, broken, a wounded animal lashing out. Just leave me alone. Baby, please. He's not coming back, Mom, okay? They're all right. He's just doing this for publicity, and once people stop caring, he'll leave again. Just like before, just like everyone said he would. The words tumbled out in a rush of pain and fury. Cheryl's heart shattered into pieces she didn't know how to gather. That's not true. You don't know that. Jack's voice cracked, the anger giving way to something more vulnerable, more terrified. You can't promise he'll stay. Nobody can. And I'm stupid for believing him. I'm stupid for thinking this time would be different. He grabbed another model from his shelf, one he'd built alone months ago, before Jerry appeared, and threw it across the room with all the strength his small body could muster. I don't need him. The words were a scream now, echoing off the walls. I don't need a fake dad who's just pretending to care. I was fine before. We were fine. Jack. Get out. He slammed his door so hard the walls shook, and something fell off a shelf in the hallway. Just get out. Cheryl stood in the hallway, tears streaming down her face, completely helpless. This was what she'd feared. This was why she'd tried to keep Jerry out. Because hope hurt worse than acceptance ever did. Because building something up just to watch it collapse was more painful than never building it at all. She tried knocking. Tried talking through the door with every soothing phrase she'd learned in 6 years of single motherhood. But Jack wouldn't respond. She could hear him inside, crying the way he used to when he was smaller, before he'd learned to hide his pain from her. The sound was breaking her. After 20 minutes of trying, of begging him to let her in, she pulled out her phone with shaking hands. The call connected on the second ring. Cheryl? Jerry's voice was alert, concerned. Is everything okay? It's Jack. Her voice broke on their son's name. Something happened at school. Kids said terrible things. He won't talk to me. He's Jerry. He's breaking down, and I don't know what to do. I can't reach him. I'm on my way. Jerry, I don't know if that's a good idea right now. I'm already in the car. The line went dead. 19 minutes later, Cheryl counted every single one. watching the clock like it held answers. There was a knock at the door. Jerry stood in the hallway, still in his work clothes, with his tie loosened and his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly during the drive. His eyes went straight to Jack's closed bedroom door, to the sound of muffled crying still coming from behind it. "How bad?" he asked quietly. "Bad." Cheryl wiped at her face with the back of her hand. "He thinks you're only here for publicity, that you'll leave once the attention dies down. Jerry, he smashed the rockets you built together, all of them." Jerry's jaw tightened, muscles jumping. "Who told him that? Does it matter?" Cheryl's voice rose with frustration and fear. "Everyone's thinking it. I've seen the articles too, Jerry. The speculation about your motives, your stock prices, the timing of everything being too convenient." She looked at him, desperate and angry and scared all at once. "Are they right? Is any of this real, or are we just a chapter in your redemption arc?" "You know it is," Jerry said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "I don't know anything anymore." Her voice cracked. "I want to believe you. God, I want to believe you. But Jack is in there breaking apart because he let himself hope, and hope has never been kind to him. Every time he's hoped for something, it's been taken away." Jerry moved past her toward Jack's door. Cheryl grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in. "If you're going to leave eventually," she whispered, and this was the fear she'd been carrying, "please do it now, before he gets more attached, before this hurts him worse than it already does. I'm begging you, if you have any doubts at all about staying, leave now." Jerry looked at her hand on his arm, then up at her face, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Certainty. Absolute, unwavering certainty. "I'm not leaving," he said simply. "Everyone leaves. It's what people do when things get hard. Then I'll be the first one who doesn't." He walked to Jack's door and pressed his palm against it like he could reach through the wood. Inside, Cheryl could hear Jack trying to muffle his sobs into his pillow, trying to be quiet, trying to suffer alone the way he'd learned to. "Jack?" Jerry's voice was soft, gentle, nothing like the commanding tone he used in boardrooms. "It's me. Can I come in?" No response, just the sound of crying that wouldn't stop, couldn't stop, had been building for 6 years and was finally breaking free. "I know what they're saying at school," Jerry continued, his voice carrying through the door. "I know you've heard all the rumors. I know you're scared. I know you think I'm going to leave." Still, nothing. Jerry slid down to sit with his back against the door, right there in the hallway. This billionaire CEO in his expensive suit, sitting on the floor of a modest apartment building like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm not pretending, Jack. I'm trying. I'm late. God, I'm so late, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Silence. Then, so quietly Cheryl almost missed it, Jack's voice came from right on the other side of the door. "You'll leave again." The words were barely a whisper, but they carried the weight of 6 years of abandonment. Jerry's voice broke. "No, I won't. Everyone leaves. Everyone always leaves. That's what grown-ups do. Not me. Not ever. You don't know that. People change their minds. People get busy. People decide kids are too much work, or too expensive, or too complicated." Jack's voice was small, scared, carrying truths no 6-year-old should understand. "What if I'm not worth staying for?" Jerry pressed his forehead against the door, and Cheryl watched his shoulders shake. Watched this billionaire CEO who commanded respect from world leaders break down in her narrow hallway. "Jack, please open the door," Jerry whispered, and there were tears in his voice now. "Please, I need to see you. I need you to see my eyes when I tell you this, so you know I mean it." "Why?" Jack's voice cracked. "So you can lie to my face, so it'll feel more real before you leave? So I can promise you something, and I need you to see that I mean it. That every word is true." A long pause. Cheryl held her breath, counting heartbeats. The door opened slowly. Jack stood there, his face blotchy and wet, his eyes red and swollen, looking smaller and more vulnerable than Cheryl had ever seen him, looking like every defense he'd built had crumbled. Jerry didn't stand up. He stayed on the floor, looking up at his son, making himself smaller, less threatening. "Ask me," Jerry said. "Ask me the question you're most afraid of." Jack's lower lip trembled. His whole body shook. "Will you leave again?" And Jerry, the man who'd built an empire on calculated risks and strategic decisions, made a promise he'd burn his whole life down to keep. Never. His voice was steady, absolute, a vow. Not even if you tell me to. Not when you're angry at me. Not when I mess up, and I will mess up. Jack, I'll probably mess up a lot, but I will never walk away from you. Never. Do you understand? I will be here when you want me, and when you don't. When you're happy with me, and when you're furious. I'm staying. Forever. How do I know you mean it? How do I know this isn't just temporary? Jerry reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, pulled up his calendar app with shaking hands, and showed it to Jack, turning the screen so he could see clearly. See this? Every Saturday is blocked, says Jack time. I told my assistant to never schedule anything then, ever, period. No exceptions. He scrolled through months of calendar entries. See Tuesday and Thursday evenings? Same thing, every one, for as long as you need me, for as long as you want me, forever. Jack stared at the phone, at months and months of Saturdays, marked with his name, at a future his father had already planned around him. But what if? I've already told my board I'm stepping back, Jerry interrupted, needing Jack to understand the totality of this. Promoted 2 VPs to handle day-to-day operations. I'm keeping my shares, keeping my title, but I'm not running the company anymore. Not the way I was, not 60 hours a week, not missing your life for meetings that don't matter. Cheryl's breath caught. Jerry, that's your whole career. I lost 6 years, he said, his eyes never leaving Jack's face. I'm not losing any more. My company made me rich. But you, Jack, you make me want to be better. You make me understand what actually matters. And no amount of money is worth missing one more day with you. Not one more soccer game. Not one more science project. Not one more Tuesday evening pizza. Nothing. Jack stood there, walls crumbling, hope and fear battling on his small face. They said you only want me for publicity, he whispered. They're wrong. They said you'll get bored when the attention stops. They're wrong about that too. They said, Jack. Jerry reached up slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving his son time to pull away. When Jack didn't move, Jerry gently took his hand. I don't care what they say. I care what you need. And what you need is a dad who shows up, who stays, who chooses you first. So that's what I'm going to be. Every single day, whether anyone's watching or not. Jack's face crumpled. His whole body shook with the force of emotions too big to contain. And then finally, he fell into Jerry's arms like he'd been waiting 6 years for permission. I'm scared, Jack sobbed into his father's shoulder, his small body trembling. I'm scared you'll change your mind. I'm scared you'll realize I'm not worth it. I'm scared. I won't. I promise, Jack. I promise on everything I have, everything I am, that I won't change my mind. You are worth it. You've always been worth it. Jerry wrapped his arms around his son and held him like he should have been holding him for 6 years. Like he'd never let go again. I'm so sorry you ever had to question that. I'm so sorry. They sat there on the floor, father and son, while Jack cried out years of hurt and Jerry whispered promises he'd die before breaking. Cheryl watched from the doorway, her own face wet, her heart breaking and healing in the same impossible moment. When Jack finally pulled back, his voice was hoarse but steadier. Will you really be at the father-son baseball game, even when the news stops talking about us? I'll be at every game, Jerry said with absolute conviction. Every event, every science fair, and school assembly, and Saturday morning breakfast. All of it, Jack. Whether anyone's taking pictures or not, whether it's newsworthy or not. I'll be there because you're my son. And that's what fathers do. They show up. Jack wiped his face with his sleeve, looked at his father with eyes that wanted desperately to believe, that were learning how. Okay, he whispered. Okay. And in that small apartment, with broken model rockets scattered across the floor and tears still drying on faces, something impossible began to heal. This is the moment that matters most, isn't it? When someone has every reason not to believe you, and you show them anyway. When you don't just say the words, you show the calendar entries. You walk away from the career, you sit on the floor and wait for a child to be ready. That's what real change looks like. If you believe people can actually change when they finally understand what matters, if you've ever had to rebuild trust from nothing, leave a comment. Tell me, Do you think Jack can learn to trust again? Because what happens next is going to test everything. Jack fell asleep on the couch that night, his head in Jerry's lap, one hand still gripping his father's sleeve, like he was afraid Jerry might disappear if he let go. The TV was on, but no one was watching. The sound was just background noise to the silence of healing. Cheryl watched from the kitchen doorway, dish towel twisted in her hands, her heart doing complicated things she didn't want to name, things that felt dangerous, things that felt like opening doors she'd sealed shut 7 years ago. Jerry sat perfectly still, afraid to move, afraid to wake Jack, afraid to disturb this fragile piece they'd somehow built from wreckage. His hand rested on Jack's hair, fingers moving in slow, careful strokes that spoke of a tenderness he'd probably never shown anyone. A gentleness that didn't match his boardroom reputation. The apartment was quiet, except for Jack's steady breathing and the distant hum of traffic outside. The broken model rockets had been swept up, the tears had dried. But the weight of what had happened and what it meant hung heavy in the air between them. I should get him to bed, Cheryl said softly, moving toward the couch. Let me. Jerry's voice was quiet. Careful, if that's okay. She hesitated. This felt like letting him further into their life, into their routines, into the intimate evening rituals that had been just hers and Jack's for 6 years. But Jack was gripping his father's sleeve, and Jerry was looking at her with something like pleading in his eyes. She nodded, watched as Jerry slowly, carefully lifted Jack into his arms. The boy didn't wake, just shifted slightly, his head falling against Jerry's shoulder in unconscious trust that made Cheryl's chest tight. Jerry carried him down the narrow hallway to his room like he was holding something infinitely precious and infinitely breakable. Like this was a privilege he'd never take for granted. Cheryl followed, turning down Jack's covers while Jerry laid him gently on the bed. Together, in silence that felt oddly comfortable, they removed his shoes, pulled the blanket up, made sure his nightlight was on because Jack still didn't like the dark, though he'd never admit it to anyone but her. Jerry stood there for a long moment, looking down at his son, sleeping peacefully now, the tear tracks still visible on his face. His hand reached out, then pulled back, then reached out again, to brush Jack's hair from his forehead in a gesture so tender it made Cheryl look away. I missed this, Jerry whispered, tucking him in, seeing him sleep. I missed all of it. Cheryl's throat tightened. He still asks me to check for monsters under the bed sometimes. He's 6, but he won't sleep unless I do. Does he know they're not real? Probably, but sometimes we need someone to check anyway, even when we know there's nothing there. Sometimes we just need to know someone's willing to look. Jerry looked at her then, and something in his expression made her heart skip, made her remember being 22 and believing in forever. Yeah, he said quietly, sometimes we do. They left the room, pulling the door halfway closed, the way Jack liked it. The living room felt different now, smaller somehow, with Jerry standing in it. He'd been here before, but tonight felt heavier, more significant. Like they were standing at a crossroads and both knew it. Coffee? Cheryl asked, needing something to do with her hands, needing to move before this moment became something she couldn't take back. Please. She moved to the kitchen, grateful for the familiar ritual. 2 mugs from the mismatched set she'd collected from thrift stores. Coffee from the pot she'd made that morning, and reheated twice already, because she could never quite finish a cup while it was hot. She added cream to hers, black for his, because she remembered that detail even after 7 years. Some things stayed with you. When she turned, he was standing in the kitchen doorway, filling the space the way he always had, big and present and impossible to ignore. We need to talk, she said, handing him the mug. I know. They sat at her tiny kitchen table, the one she'd bought at a yard sale 7 years ago, and refinished herself when she couldn't afford new furniture. Jerry's knees bumped hers beneath it because there wasn't enough room, and neither of them moved away. The contact felt electric, dangerous. Cheryl wrapped her hands around her mug, stared into it like it held answers instead of lukewarm coffee. What happened tonight can't happen again, she started. I know, I'm sorry. I'm not finished. Her voice was firm, not angry, but absolute. You saw what happens when Jack starts to believe in you and then doubts it. You saw how badly it broke him. And that was after 2 weeks, Jerry. 2 weeks of you being present and consistent. She looked up, met his eyes across the table. What happens in 2 months? 2 years? What happens when your company needs you and you have to choose between a board meeting and a school play? What happens when keeping your promises gets inconvenient? When the novelty wears off and you remember all the things you gave up? Jerry set his mug down carefully, like it might shatter if he wasn't gentle. It won't. You don't know that. Nobody does. Life happens. Emergencies happen. You're still running a multi-billion-dollar company, and I'm still working double shifts at the diner trying to make rent. We live in different worlds, Jerry. Completely different universes. And Jack is the one caught in between. And if you fail him, if you can't sustain this, he's the one who pays the price. Then tell me how to fix it. His voice was raw, desperate in a way she'd never heard from him. Tell me what you need me to do, and I'll do it. Anything. Cheryl took a shaky breath, steadying herself for what she had to say. I need you to be honest with yourself about whether you can really do this long term. Because if you stay forever. You don't get to leave when it gets hard. You don't get to decide in 6 months that fatherhood is more work than you expected. You don't get to walk away when something shinier comes along, or when your board pressures you, or when you realize what you've sacrificed. She leaned forward, her eyes burning with intensity, born from 6 years of protecting her son alone. But if you can't do that, if there's even a part of you that's unsure, even a tiny doubt about whether you can sustain this, then you leave now. Tonight, before Jack gets more attached, before he builds his whole world around you, and you decide you can't stay in it. The words hung between them like a verdict waiting to be read. Jerry's hands trembled around his coffee mug. That's not a fair choice. Life isn't fair. You taught me that 7 years ago when you chose venture capital meetings over answering my calls. He flinched like she'd struck him. Cheryl, you asked me to let you try to make this right, so I'm telling you what that looks like, what it actually costs. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. All in or all out, Jerry. No middle ground. Not with Jack's heart on the line. Not when he's already been broken once, by your absence. Jerry stood up abruptly, started pacing in the small space between the table and the counter. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. His hand kept going to his hair, pulling at it the way he did when his mind was racing too fast to catch up with itself. You think I don't know what's at stake? His voice rose slightly, then caught himself and lowered it, remembering Jack sleeping down the hall. You think I don't lie awake every night, thinking about how badly I could mess this up? How I could fail him again? Then why are you here? Cheryl's voice broke, and this was the question underneath everything. If you're so scared of failing, why not just stay away? Why put us all through this? Why give him hope, if you're not absolutely certain? Jerry stopped pacing, turned to face her. And the look in his eyes made her breath catch, because she recognized it. It was the same desperate intensity he'd had 7 years ago when he was trying to convince her his startup would work, that they'd have a future once he succeeded. Except this time, he wasn't talking about business. Because I'm more scared of not trying. The kitchen went quiet. Even the traffic outside seemed to fade. I've built everything I thought I wanted, Jerry continued, his voice rough with emotion. Money. Power. Success. Recognition. My name on buildings. My face on magazine covers. Forbes called me a visionary. Ted invited me to speak. Presidents have asked my opinion. He laughed bitterly. I thought that's what mattering looked like. I thought that's what it meant to be successful. He moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But you know what I do most nights? I sit in a penthouse that cost $8 million, with art on the walls worth more than most people make in a lifetime, and I feel nothing. Nothing, Cheryl. It's empty. All of it. I have everything, and it means nothing, because there's no one to share it with who actually matters. He was close enough now that she could see the lines around his eyes, could smell his cologne mixed with coffee, and then I saw Jack's picture in that article, and something I didn't even know was missing suddenly had a name, a face, a reason. His voice cracked. I have a son, and he's brilliant and brave and so much better than I deserve. And for the first time in 7 years, I felt something real. Something that mattered more than stock prices or board meetings or any deal I've ever closed. Cheryl's eyes were burning. She blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall, but they came anyway. Feeling something isn't enough, she said, but her voice was weaker now. Jack needs more than your feelings. He needs consistency, reliability, Someone who shows up even when it's not convenient or exciting or emotionally fulfilling. I'm already doing that. Jerry pulled out his phone, showed her the screen with shaking hands. Look, I wasn't lying about stepping back. I've delegated 70% of my responsibilities, promoted my COO to handle day-to-day operations. I'm keeping my board seat, but the company doesn't need me in the office 50 hours a week anymore. They don't need me at every meeting. They don't need me to sacrifice my life for growth. Cheryl stared at the emails, the organizational charts, the memos announcing major structural changes, all dated from the last 2 weeks. Jerry, that's your entire life's work. My entire life's work was empty. The words came out fierce, final. I spent 7 years building something that doesn't matter to anyone who actually knows me. That doesn't love me back. That won't remember me when I'm gone, except as a footnote in tech history. I'm not making that mistake again. I'm not choosing empty success over real connection. Not this time. You might resent us later, when the shine wears off and you realize what you gave up. I won't. You don't know that. I do. He set the phone down, looked at her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. Because I already gave you up once, Cheryl. Gave up the only thing that ever made me feel real. The only person who ever saw me as something other than a success story or a paycheck or a connection to make. And I've regretted it every single day since. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with years of unspoken truth. Cheryl's hands shook. Don't do that. Do what? Make this about us. This is about Jack. It's about all of us. Jerry's voice was soft now. Careful. Like he was handling something fragile. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything from you. I know I burned that bridge 7 years ago and salted the earth so nothing could grow back. But I'm not just here for Jack, Cheryl. I'm here because walking away from you was the biggest mistake I ever made. And I've made a lot of mistakes. Jerry. Let me finish, please. He took a breath that shook. I loved you. Past tense. Except, it's not past, is it? I never stopped. I just convinced myself that success mattered more, that we'd have time later, that love could wait while I built empires and proved myself to people whose opinions didn't actually matter. He laughed bitterly. Turns out, love doesn't wait. It just leaves and takes everything that matters with it. Cheryl felt tears sliding down her cheeks now. Couldn't stop them. Didn't have the energy to try. You hurt me, she whispered, and this was the wound that had never fully healed. You made me feel like I wasn't enough. Like our future together wasn't as important as your company's future. Like I was something you could come back to later, after you'd finished becoming whoever you thought you needed to be. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Cheryl. His voice broke completely. If I could go back and choose differently, if I could answer those calls, read those messages, be there when you needed me, I would give everything I have for that chance. Everything. But you can't. None of us can. She wiped at her face roughly, with the back of her hand. We can only move forward from here. And moving forward means being honest about what this is and what it can be. What do you want it to be? The question was too big, too complicated, too dangerous to answer honestly. I want you to be Jack's father, she said carefully, choosing her words like stepping stones across a river. I want him to have what he's always needed. That's all I can think about right now. That's all that matters. And after? Jerry's voice was quiet. After he's secure? After he knows I'm not leaving? What then, Cheryl? She looked at him, really looked at him, saw the gray at his temples that hadn't been there before, the lines around his eyes that came from years of stress and sleepless nights. The way 7 years had changed them both into people their younger selves might not recognize. But underneath it all, she saw the 23-year-old in the coffee shop who'd made her believe in forever. Except now, he'd learned what forever actually cost, what it required. And he was saying he was willing to pay it. I don't know, she admitted, and the honesty felt like stepping off a cliff. I spent 7 years learning not to need you. Learning to be enough on my own. Learning to protect myself and Jack from disappointment. I can't just forget that, because you showed up with promises and changed your calendar settings. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking for a chance to prove those promises are real. To show you that I've learned, that I've changed, that I finally understand what actually matters. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes searching hers desperately. "I want to be here, Cheryl. Not as a billionaire trying to ease his guilt by writing checks. Not as a charity case checking boxes on some redemption tour. I want to be here as Jack's father. As someone who's finally figured out what actually matters in life." He paused, and something in his expression shifted. Became more vulnerable, more honest, more terrifying, and maybe as something more. "If you'll let me. If you can ever forgive me enough to try." The words hung in the small kitchen, full of possibility and danger and hope that terrified her more than anything had in years. "You can't just say things like that," Cheryl whispered. "Why not?" "Because what if you mean them? What if I let myself believe you? And then 6 months from now, you realize this life, this small apartment, this ordinary existence isn't enough? What if you miss the excitement and the power and the world you gave up? Then I'll miss it. But I won't leave." His voice was absolute. "Because this you and Jack and dinners at this table and model rockets on the floor, this is more real than anything I had before. This matters. You matter." Cheryl stood up abruptly, needing distance, needing space to think clearly. But the kitchen was too small, and Jerry was too close, and her heart was doing things she'd sworn she wouldn't let it do. "This is too much," she said, wrapping her arms around herself protectively. "Too fast. Jack just broke down tonight because he's terrified you'll leave. We can't complicate this more by bringing us into it. I'm not trying to complicate it. I'm trying to be honest about what I want, about what I'm hoping for." Honest would have been 7 years ago. The words came out sharper than she intended, anger flaring up to protect her from the vulnerability of hope. Honest would have been answering my calls, reading my texts, caring enough to ask why I needed to talk, instead of assuming it could wait for your convenience. "You're right." Jerry stood too, but kept his distance, respecting the space she needed. "You're absolutely right. And I can't change that. I can't go back and be the man I should have been. But I'm here now, Cheryl, and I'm begging for a chance to show you that I'm different. That I've learned. That I finally understand what I almost lost forever." Cheryl wrapped her arms tighter around herself. "And if you're wrong? If 6 months from now you realize this life is too small for you, too ordinary, too far from the world you built? It won't happen. You can't promise that. I can promise I'll try, every single day." He moved closer, slowly, giving her time to back away. She didn't. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I don't deserve another chance. But Jack deserves a father who fights for him every day. And you, Cheryl, you deserve someone who sees what he almost lost and never takes it for granted again." They stood in her small kitchen, surrounded by mismatched dishes and appliances that barely worked, and the smell of reheated coffee, and Cheryl felt something she'd buried 7 years ago, trying to claw its way back to the surface. Hope. Dangerous, terrifying, impossible hope. "I need time," she whispered. "Jack needs time. We need to know this is real and sustainable before anything else." "Take all the time you need," Jerry said softly. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll prove it every day until you believe it. You say that now. I'll say it every day for the rest of my life, if that's what it takes." He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and gently took her hand. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, in a touch so gentle, it broke something inside her. "I want to be here, Cheryl, not as a billionaire. Not as someone trying to buy his way back into your good graces. I want to be here as Jack's father, as someone who finally understands that a family matters more than an empire." His thumb continued its slow path across her knuckles, and the touch was achingly familiar. "And maybe," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "as something more, if you'll let me, if you can find it in yourself to trust me again." Cheryl looked at their joined hands, remembered when they used to fit together perfectly, when holding hands felt as natural as breathing, wondered if maybe impossibly, dangerously, hopefully they could fit together again. "One day at a time," she said finally. "You show up for Jack. You prove you mean what you say. You be consistent and reliable and present. And we'll see. That's all I can offer right now." "One day at a time," Jerry agreed, and his smile was small but genuine. "That's all I'm asking for." He squeezed her hand once, then let go even though everything in his expression said he didn't want to. started toward the door, stopped at the threshold, and turned back. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me this chance, for protecting him when I wasn't there, for being strong enough for all of us when I was too weak to even try." Cheryl didn't trust her voice to respond, so she just nodded. After he left, she stood in her kitchen for a long time, staring at the space where he'd been, feeling the ghost of his touch on her hand. Down the hall, Jack slept peacefully for the first time in days, no longer wondering if his father would disappear. And Cheryl, brave, broken, cautiously hopeful Cheryl, let herself wonder if maybe, just maybe, some broken things could be rebuilt into something even stronger than before. The first soccer practice Jerry attended, he showed up wearing a suit. Cheryl spotted him from across the field, navy blazer, dress shoes sinking into the grass with each step, looking completely out of place among parents in jeans and team jerseys and comfortable shoes. A few mothers noticed him too. Whispers spread like wildfire through dry grass. "Is that really him? What's he doing here? I thought it was just for publicity. Give it 2 more weeks, he'll stop showing up." But Jerry didn't seem to notice or care. His eyes were locked on Jack, who was running drills with the other kids, his small legs pumping hard to keep up with boys who'd been playing longer. When Jack glanced toward the sidelines and saw his father standing there, actually there, like he'd promised, the smile that broke across his face made every parent turn to look. Jerry waved, just a simple wave, but the gesture carried weight, a promise kept, a father showing up, exactly like he said he would. Cheryl watched from her usual spot near the bleachers, her chest tight with something she didn't want to name. This was the 3rd week in a row. 3 practices, 2 games, and 1 school assembly Jerry had attended. No cameras, no press releases, no reporters following him around. Just him, showing up consistently because his son needed him to. After practice, Jack ran straight to Jerry, grass stains on his knees, and sweat dampening his hair, looking happier than Cheryl had seen him in months. "Did you see my goal?" Jack asked breathlessly. "I saw it. That was incredible." Jerry knelt down, not caring about his expensive suit pants on the dirt. "You faked left, then went right. Where'd you learn that move?" "Coach taught us last week. I've been practicing every day after school." "It shows. You're really good at this, Jack." Jack beamed like Jerry had just handed him the world on a silver platter. But not everyone was smiling. Cheryl felt eyes on her specifically, Linda Morrison and Carol Reed, 2 mothers who'd always been polite but distant. Now they were staring, heads together, whispering behind their hands in a way that wasn't subtle at all. Cheryl's stomach knotted. She knew what they were thinking, what they were probably saying. "Gold digger, using her kid to trap a billionaire. This won't last. Give it a month and he'll be gone." "Hey," Jerry's voice pulled her back. He'd walked over with Jack, who was now showing him a new rocket design he'd sketched during lunch. "Ready to go?" Cheryl asked, avoiding eye contact with the other mothers who were still watching them. "Actually," Jerry glanced at Jack, then back at her, "I was hoping we could grab dinner, all of us. There's this place near here that has amazing burgers," and Jack mentioned he's never been. Jack's eyes lit up with hope and excitement. "Really? Can we, Mom?" Cheryl hesitated. Dinner meant being seen together in public as a family unit, meant more gossip, more speculation, more questions she didn't have answers to, meant acknowledging that this thing between them, whatever it was becoming, was real enough to be visible. "Please, Mom?" Jack's voice was hopeful in a way that made her chest ache. She looked at Jerry, saw the question in his eyes. "Is this okay? Are we ready for this?" "Okay," she heard herself say, "but somewhere quiet. No fancy places." The diner Jerry chose was a small family place with cracked vinyl booths and laminated menus that had been wiped clean so many times the pictures were fading. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed billionaire trying to impress. Just good food and reasonable prices and families eating together on a weeknight. Jack ordered a cheeseburger and chocolate shake, talked nonstop about the robot he was building for his science class, how the sensors weren't calibrating right, how he needed better motors, how his teacher said his design was the most advanced in the entire 6th grade. Jerry listened to every word, like it was the most important business presentation he'd ever heard. Asked questions that showed he was actually paying attention. Pulled out his phone to show Jack videos of industrial robots his company had helped design, explaining the mechanics in ways Jack could understand. Their heads bent together over the small screen, and Cheryl watched something shift in Jack's posture. He sat taller, spoke more confidently, like having his father's undivided attention made him believe in himself more. After dinner, when Jerry walked them to Cheryl's car, he said quietly, "I want to build him something." "What do you mean?" "Jack's passionate about space and robotics. He should have somewhere to work on his projects. Somewhere better than that tiny desk in his room that's barely big enough for his homework." Jerry pulled out his phone, showed her sketches he'd apparently been working on for days. A workshop area? Nothing huge, just a small shed with a workbench, proper tools, maybe a telescope mount on top for stargazing. Cheryl stared at the detailed plans, complete with measurements and materials lists. "Jerry, that's too much." "It's not enough, but it's a start." He looked at her, his expression earnest and vulnerable. "Let me do this. Please, let me give him a space to dream bigger than this apartment allows." The landlord would never approve. "I already asked." He said yes. Of course he did, because Jerry Arnold asking meant Jerry Arnold probably offered to pay for building maintenance for the next decade. "You're going to spoil him," Cheryl said, but her voice was soft, not accusing, just observing a truth. "Maybe a little." Jerry smiled, and it transformed his face. "But mostly, I'm trying to make up for lost time. Is that so wrong?" No. It wasn't wrong. It was exactly what Jack needed. What he'd always needed: someone who saw his potential and wanted to help him reach it. "Okay," she said, "but nothing too extravagant. This is still his childhood, not a tech showcase for your engineering friends." Deal. The workshop took Jerry 3 weekends to build. He showed up every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. sharp. Sometimes with hired help, but mostly just him. Learning how to use power tools he'd probably never touched before in his life. Jack helped, handing him screws and nails, talking constantly about what he'd build first, what projects he wanted to try. Cheryl watched from her kitchen window, coffee in hand, as father and son worked side by side. Watched Jerry measure twice and cut once, explaining to Jack why precision mattered in building anything that lasted. Watched him let Jack hammer the easier nails, even when they went in crooked. Watched him ruffle Jack's hair when the boy got frustrated, speaking too quietly for Cheryl to hear, but clearly saying something that made Jack laugh and try again. She wasn't the only one watching. The neighbors had noticed. Of course they had. By the second weekend, there were always a few people lingering nearby, pretending to check their mail or water plants that clearly didn't need watering. Phones out, pictures being taken, videos being recorded. By Monday, the pictures were online. Local news picked it up first, then national outlets. Billionaire CEO builds workshop for newly discovered son. The headlines made it sound calculated, strategic. Like Jerry was performing fatherhood for good publicity rather than genuinely trying to connect with his child. Cheryl's phone buzzed constantly with texts from people she barely knew. Saw the article. "How long have you known who Jack's father was? Must be nice to have a billionaire on the hook for child support. My cousin says Jerry's just doing this for tax breaks. Rich people always have angles." Each message felt like a small cut, death by 1,000 judgments from people who knew nothing about their situation. Wednesday afternoon, when she picked Jack up from school, she noticed other mothers giving her looks, some curious, some envious, some openly hostile. Linda Morrison actually turned away when Cheryl said hello, pretending she hadn't heard. That evening, when Jerry came over with Chinese takeout for dinner, Cheryl waited until Jack was in his room before confronting him. "People are talking." Jerry set down his chopsticks with careful precision. "I know. Do you? Because I'm the one getting the looks at school pickup. I'm the one hearing the whispers about gold digging and using my son as a meal ticket. I'm the one being judged by people who don't know anything about our situation." Her voice shook with frustration. "They think this is all some calculated scheme on my part. Do you care what they think?" "Yes." The admission burst out. "Because Jack cares. Because kids hear what their parents say, and then they repeat it at school, and Jack has to deal with the consequences. He already dealt with kids calling him a liar about having a dad. Now he has to deal with kids saying his dad is fake or temporary or just here for publicity." Jerry was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, "A reporter called me yesterday, big national outlet. Offered me 6 figures for an exclusive interview about finding my secret son. Wanted photos, behind-the-scenes access, the whole package. Cheryl's blood ran cold. What did you say? I told him if he printed one word about Jack, without my explicit written permission, I'd bury him in lawsuits so deep his grandchildren would still be paying legal fees. Jerry's voice was calm, but absolute. Steel wrapped in velvet. Then I called my lawyer and had NDAs drawn up for anyone who works at Jack's school. Teachers, administrators, janitors, cafeteria staff. They can't sell stories. Can't share photos. Can't exploit him for profit without facing serious legal consequences. Jerry. Let them talk, Cheryl. Let them whisper and speculate and judge all they want. I don't care what they think of me. I stopped caring about other people's opinions years ago. What I care about is protecting Jack. And you. Making sure their words don't actually hurt you. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. You can't control what people say, she whispered. No, but I can make sure their words don't have power. I can make sure Jack knows the truth. I can keep showing up every single day until everyone realizes this isn't a publicity stunt or a tax scheme or whatever else they want to believe. This is my life now. This is what matters. The workshop was finished on the 3rd Sunday. Jerry installed the telescope mount himself, making sure it was secure enough to hold the expensive telescope he'd ordered as a surprise. Inside the small shed, the workbench was organized with tools, a soldering station, circuit boards, and motors, all carefully labeled in Jack's handwriting so he'd know where everything belonged. When Jerry lifted Jack onto his shoulders so he could hang the sign they'd made together, Jack's workshop, painted in blue letters, on weathered wood, Cheryl felt something crack inside her chest. This was real. All of it. Jerry wasn't performing. He was becoming. Becoming the father Jack needed. Becoming someone who understood what actually mattered. That night, after Jack had given them both an enthusiastic tour of his new space at least 5 times, and finally fallen asleep with a smile on his face that made Cheryl's heart ache with happiness, she made tea. She found Jerry on her small balcony, staring out at the city lights. The workshop was visible below, its small windows glowing like a beacon. Like possibility made physical. Tea? She offered, holding out a mug. He took it, their fingers brushing in a way that felt deliberate. Neither pulled away quickly. He's happy, Jerry said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. I've never seen him this happy, this confident. You did that. You gave him something to be proud of. Something that's his. We did that. Jerry looked at her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. You raised an incredible kid, Cheryl. Smart, kind, resilient, creative. That's all you. Everything good in him comes from you. You're helping him believe in himself, teaching him that he's worth someone's time and effort. That's all you. They stood in comfortable silence, sipping tea, watching the workshop below. Somewhere in the building, a dog barked. A car alarm went off. Normal city sounds on a Sunday night. The other parents are jealous, Jerry said suddenly. What? I heard them talking at the soccer game. They're not judging you, or not just judging you. He smiled slightly. They're jealous, because their kids have fathers who are too busy, or too tired, or too checked out to build workshops, or come to practices. And Jack has me, someone who shows up, someone who built him something with his bare hands instead of just throwing money at the problem. Cheryl's throat tightened. You did throw money at it. The tools alone probably cost more than my car. The tools I can replace anytime. Time, I can't. He set his mug on the railing carefully. I lost 6 years, Cheryl. 6 years of firsts and milestones and moments I'll never get back. I'm not losing any more days because I'm afraid of what people might say or think. Their opinions don't matter. Jack's happiness does. Your peace of mind does. That's it. She looked at him, really looked at him, in the glow of the city lights, saw sawdust still caught in his hair from earlier, saw the small cut on his thumb from where he'd caught it on a nail while installing shelves. Saw this billionaire who'd probably never done manual labor before in his life, standing on her balcony with evidence of real work on his hands. You're getting better at this, she said softly. Being a dad. Being present. I have a good reason to try. His eyes met hers. And maybe a good reason to hope for more. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and danger, and something that felt dangerously like the beginning of forgiveness. Jack asked me today if you were staying forever, Cheryl said quietly. What did you tell him? I said I didn't know, that we'd have to see, that some things take time to prove. And what do you think? Now, after 3 weeks of me showing up? Cheryl wrapped both hands around her mug, feeling the warmth seep into her palms like comfort. I think you're showing up every day, just like you promised, and that matters. I'll keep showing up, for as long as you'll let me, forever, if you'll have me. They stood there on her small balcony, the city stretched out below them, Jack sleeping safely inside, and something that felt dangerously close to hope blooming between them like flowers after winter. More tea? Cheryl asked, even though both their mugs were still half full. Jerry smiled, and it was genuine, and warm, and full of understanding. Yeah, I'd like that. And for the first time in 7 years, Cheryl thought maybe, just maybe, broken things could be rebuilt. Maybe second chances were real. Maybe trust could grow back stronger after being shattered. Maybe they were building something new from the ruins of what they'd lost. This is what real change looks like, isn't it? Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, though Jerry's certainly trying those too. But showing up. Consistently. Building something with your hands even when you don't know what you're doing. Letting a 6-year-old teach you things. That's the work that actually matters. If you're watching someone in your life try to earn back trust, or if you're the one trying to prove you've changed, share this video. Because what's coming next is the moment that will prove whether all this effort is real or just another promise that won't last. The flyer came home on a Tuesday, tucked into Jack's backpack between a math worksheet and a permission slip for a field trip to the Science Museum. Annual Father-Son Night. Friday, November 15th, 6 to 8 p.m. Games, food, prizes. Bring your dad for an evening of fun. Cheryl found it when she was helping Jack with homework that evening. Her stomach dropped instantly. This event had been a source of pain for years. Other kids excited about bringing their fathers, while Jack pretended he didn't care, pretended it didn't matter, that he was always the one who stayed home or brought a substitute who wasn't his actual dad. Last year, he'd asked if his science teacher, Mr. Patterson, could come with him. The teacher had agreed, kind man that he was, but Jack had come home quiet and withdrawn afterward. Having watched 20 other boys with their actual fathers while he had a substitute who everyone knew wasn't really his. Jack, she started gently. I know. He didn't look up from his homework, his pencil moving mechanically across the page. It's okay. I don't have to go. It's fine. Baby, I'm sure Jerry would. Would he? Jack's voice was small, carrying traces of old doubt that hadn't fully healed. What if he has a meeting? What if something comes up at work? What if something more important happens? 6 weeks. That's how long Jerry had been consistently in their lives. 6 weeks of showing up, of kept promises, of being present. But old fears died hard, especially for a boy who'd learned to protect himself by not hoping for too much. There's only one way to find out, Cheryl said gently, sitting down next to him. Ask him. Jack stared at the flyer for a long moment, his finger tracing the border. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. What if he says no? Then we deal with it together, and I'll take you for ice cream after and we'll watch movies all night. She turned him to face her. But Jack, I think he'd really want to be there. I think he's been waiting for you to invite him to something like this. That evening, when Jerry arrived for dinner, a routine they'd fallen into naturally, 3 nights a week, now Jack was quieter than usual. He pushed his food around his plate with his fork, creating patterns in the mashed potatoes. Kept glancing at his backpack, where the flyer was still tucked inside. Jerry noticed immediately. Of course he did. He'd gotten remarkably good at reading Jack's moods, at sensing when something was bothering his son. What's up, buddy? Jerry asked, setting down his fork to give Jack his full attention. You've been quiet tonight. Jack glanced at Cheryl. She gave him an encouraging nod, a small smile that said, it's okay to ask. There's this thing at school, Jack started, his voice hesitant. On Friday night, Father-Son Night, we play games and eat pizza and stuff. There are prizes. Jerry's expression softened immediately. That sounds really fun. Yeah. Jack picked at his napkin, not quite able to meet Jerry's eyes. I usually don't go. But I was thinking, maybe. He took a breath, forced the words out in a rush. Will you go with me? The question hung in the air for only a heartbeat before Jerry answered. Yes, no hesitation. No checking his calendar. No, let me see if I can move some things around. Or, I'll try but I might be busy. Just, yes. Immediate and absolute. Jack's head snapped up. Really? Really? I'd love to. Jerry smiled, and it transformed his whole face. What time should I pick you up? 6 o'clock. It starts at 6. Then I'll be here at 5:45. Maybe we can get matching something. Matching shirts or hats. Or what do people wear to these things? Jack actually giggled, the sound bright and joyful. I don't know. Just normal clothes? I think. Then we'll figure it out together. That night, after Jerry left promising to research father-son night appropriate attire, Cheryl found Jack staring at the flyer on his desk, a smile playing at his lips that made her heart sing. When she tucked him in, he whispered, Mom, do you think he'll really come? Yes, baby. I do. I really do. Ruiz says his dad comes every year, says it's the best night of the school year. Jack's voice was wistful, carrying years of longing. I always wondered what that was like, having a dad who shows up to things. Cheryl kissed his forehead, smoothing his hair back. This year, you'll find out. Friday arrived, feeling momentous. Jack changed his shirt 3 times, trying to find the right one. Combed his hair until it actually stayed flat, using way too much water. Stood by the window at 5:30, a full 15 minutes early, watching for Jerry's car with barely contained excitement. When the Mercedes pulled up at exactly 5:45, Jack's face split into a grin so wide it made Cheryl's chest ache with happiness. Jerry emerged from the car in jeans and a casual sweater, no suit this time, he'd learned. In his hand was a small box that immediately captured Jack's attention. Ready? Jerry asked when Jack opened the door, barely able to contain his excitement. Ready? Jack practically bounced on his toes. Jerry handed him the box with a smile. I got us something. Inside were matching baseball caps, nothing fancy or expensive, just simple navy blue with their initials embroidered on the side. JB and JA, father and son. Jack stared at them, then up at Jerry with eyes that were suspiciously shiny. You got us matching hats? I figured, father-son night. We should look like a team. Jerry's voice was casual, but Cheryl could hear the emotion underneath, the significance of this moment. What do you think? Jack put his on immediately, adjusting it carefully. Jerry did the same. And standing there in her small apartment, father and son wearing matching hats and matching grins and matching expressions of barely contained joy, Cheryl felt something shift permanently in her chest. This was real. This was happening. Her son was going to father-son night with his actual father. And the smile on his face was worth every risk she'd taken by letting Jerry back into their lives. I'll have him back by 8:30, Jerry promised, looking at Cheryl. Take your time, Cheryl said, even though every maternal instinct screamed to follow them, to witness this moment she'd hoped for since Jack was born. Have fun. Make memories. As they walked toward the door together, Jack's hand found Jerry's naturally, like they'd been holding hands for years instead of weeks. Like this was normal, like this was how it was supposed to be. Cheryl watched from the window as they drove away, her hand pressed against the glass, tears streaming down her face, happy tears this time, grateful tears, hopeful tears. The school gym was packed when they arrived, fathers and sons everywhere, throwing basketballs, playing cornhole, loading up plates with pizza and cookies. The noise was deafening, laughter and shouts, and the squeak of shoes on polished floors and music playing from speakers someone had set up. Jack hesitated at the entrance. This space held years of painful memories, years of watching from the sidelines, years of being the kid without a dad at the father-focused events. Jerry must have sensed the hesitation because his hand settled on Jack's shoulder, steady and reassuring. You okay? Yeah. Jack straightened his shoulders, adjusted his matching hat. Let's go. They'd barely stepped inside when the whispers started. Is that Jerry Arnold? With Jack Beam? Oh my God, it really is him. I heard about this but I didn't actually believe. He actually showed up. Heads turned throughout the gymnasium. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Parents nudged each other, phones emerging from pockets faster than you could blink. The billionaire CEO at an elementary school, father-son night, wasn't something you saw every day. This was news. But Jerry ignored them all. Every stare, every whisper, every phone pointed in their direction. His attention was completely, totally, absolutely on Jack. What do you want to do first? Jerry asked, scanning the activities. Basketball? Cornhole? I saw a three-legged race sign up over there that looks hilariously difficult. Before Jack could answer, a familiar voice cut through the noise like a knife. Well. Look who actually showed up. Ruiz stood with his father, a tall man with the same cruel smirk his son had inherited. Wilder was beside them, looking less confident than usual, his eyes wide as he stared at Jerry. Jerry's hand tightened slightly on Jack's shoulder in a protective gesture, but his voice stayed calm and pleasant. Evening. Ruiz's father looked Jerry up and down with obvious judgment and poorly hidden envy. So you're the famous father everyone's been talking about. Thought you'd be taller. Dad, Ruiz started, suddenly uncertain, sensing this might not go the way he'd expected. But Jerry just smiled. Polite, unruffled, in complete control. Jack, want to show me how to play that basketball game over there? They walked away, leaving Ruiz and his father standing there, looking foolish. And Jack, brave, broken Jack who'd spent years being mocked, stood straighter than Cheryl had ever seen him. Walked with confidence that came from having backup, from finally having someone on his side. At the basketball station, they played together. Jerry was terrible at first, his shots bouncing off the rim more often than going in. But Jack coached him patiently, showed him the technique, demonstrated the proper form, and Jerry listened like Jack was the expert, because in this moment, he was. Other boys watched, other fathers noticed, and slowly, the atmosphere in the gym shifted. He's actually playing with him, someone whispered. Did you see that? He let his kid teach him instead of showing off. That's actually really sweet. My dad never listens when I try to teach him things. Across the gym, more fathers started actually engaging with their sons, instead of standing on the sidelines talking to other adults. Jerry's genuine interest in Jack's instructions was setting a tone, creating a standard. The principal announced the father-son basketball challenge over the loudspeaker, his voice cutting through the noise. 3 minutes on the clock. Father-son teams compete for the highest score. Winner gets bragging rights and a pizza party for their whole class. Boys dragged their fathers to the court with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The energy was electric, competitive, fun in the way these events were supposed to be. Jack looked up at Jerry uncertainly. We don't have to. You probably don't want to embarrass yourself in front of everyone. Are you kidding? Jerry grinned, and it was genuine and excited. We're definitely doing this. We've been practicing. We've got this. They lined up with 5 other teams. The principal blew the whistle. Chaos erupted, basketballs flying everywhere, fathers lifting sons to reach the hoop, laughter echoing off the walls, competitive banter being shouted. Jerry and Jack were awkward at first, their rhythm off. Jerry's shots were clumsy. Jack was too short to reach easily even with Jerry holding him up. But they figured out a system, Jerry lifting Jack at just the right angle, Jack focusing completely on his shots, both of them laughing when they missed, and celebrating loudly when they scored. For my son, Jerry shouted when Jack made a particularly difficult shot, his voice carrying across the entire gym with pride that was impossible to fake. The words echoed, powerful, absolute, a public declaration that this child was his, and he was proud of it, and everyone should know. The buzzer sounded. Scores were tallied with dramatic flair by the principal. Jerry and Jack hadn't won, came in 3rd place, but when they were called up to receive their small prize, a ribbon and a coupon for ice cream at the local shop, the applause that erupted was thunderous. Not polite clapping. Real applause, genuine appreciation, from parents who'd witnessed something authentic. From kids who'd seen Jack transform from the boy without a father to the boy whose father couldn't stop smiling at him. Ruiz stood frozen near the snack table, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Wilder was whispering urgently to his own father, pointing at Jack and Jerry, clearly trying to explain what he'd gotten wrong, how he'd misjudged the situation completely. Several other kids approached Jack afterward, wanting to know about his dad, asking if he was really the Jerry Arnold, treating Jack with a respect and interest they'd never shown before. Jack handled it with surprising grace, proud but not boastful, happy but not arrogant. Later, when most families had left and the gym was starting to empty, Jack asked if they could go see his classroom. Wanted to show Jerry his desk, his cubby, the space-themed project he'd done that Mrs. Chen had displayed prominently with a gold star. They stood in the empty hallway outside the classroom, and Jack pointed proudly at his artwork on the wall. "This is mine," Mrs. Chen said. "It was the best in the class." "It's incredible." Jerry studied it with genuine interest, not the patronizing attention adults sometimes gave children's art. "The detail on Saturn's rings is amazing. Did you use reference photos?" "Yeah, for my astronomy book. The one you got me last month." Jack's voice carried pride and happiness. "I spent 2 weeks on it." "I can tell. This is museum-quality work, Jack." "Really?" They stood there, father and son, discussing art and planets and dreams in a way that made these topics feel important and valid. And Jack's voice carried confidence it had never held before. The confidence of a boy who'd been chosen, who'd been claimed publicly, who'd been wanted loudly and obviously in front of everyone who'd ever doubted. As they walked back to the car under streetlights that cast everything in orange and shadow, Jack suddenly stopped, looked up at Jerry, with an expression so serious it made Jerry pause mid-step. "Dad." The word came out tentatively, like Jack was testing it, seeing how it felt in his mouth. The first time he'd said it out loud instead of just thinking it. Jerry's breath caught, his whole body went still. "Yeah, buddy? I'm glad you found us." 4 words, simple, honest, carrying the weight of 6 years of longing and 6 weeks of healing and a future that suddenly felt possible. Jerry knelt right there in the parking lot, not caring about the wet asphalt or the oil stains or the other families walking past them. He pulled Jack into a hug that was probably too tight, too desperate, too full of emotion for a regular Friday night in a school parking lot. "Me too," Jerry whispered, his voice rough and breaking. "Me too, Jack. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." When they pulled apart, both had wet eyes glistening under the streetlights. Neither tried to hide it. Neither felt the need to. They drove back to the apartment with matching hats and matching smiles. Jack talking the entire way about the basketball game, about how other kids had been impressed, about how his teacher had invited Jerry to the science fair next month, about how maybe they could practice for next year's father-son night so they could actually win. Next year. Jack was already thinking about next year. Already believing Jerry would still be there. The fear was fading, being replaced with something stronger. Trust. When they arrived, Cheryl was waiting on the front steps, unable to stay inside any longer, needing to see her son's face and know how it had gone. Jack ran to her before Jerry had even fully parked. "Mom, we got 3rd place, and Dad lifted me so I could shoot better, and everyone saw. Everyone knows he's really my dad now. And other kids wanted to talk to me about him, and..." "Slow down, baby. Breathe." Cheryl laughed, but her eyes were on Jerry, who was walking up slowly, hands in his pockets, looking happier than she'd ever seen him. "You were there?" Jack's eyes widened with realization. "You came to watch?" "I couldn't miss it." She looked past him to Jerry, and something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, recognition that they'd just crossed another threshold. "How could I miss this?" That night, after Jack had relived every moment 3 more times, with increasing detail and finally fallen asleep, clutching his ribbon and wearing his matching hat, Cheryl found Jerry sitting on her balcony again, their spot, apparently. She sat beside him without asking. They'd moved past needing permission for small moments like this. "He called me Dad," Jerry said quietly, staring out at the city lights. "In the parking lot. Just once. But he said it." "I know," he told me. Cheryl's voice was soft. 3 times, actually, very proudly. "Cheryl," Jerry's voice cracked with emotion. "Tonight. Seeing him so happy, so proud, watching him introduce me to other kids like it was the most natural thing in the world. That's what I almost missed. That's what I would have lost forever if I hadn't seen that article." She took his hand without thinking about it, the gesture becoming natural. "But you didn't miss it. You're here now." "I'm here now," he repeated, squeezing her hand. "And I'm never leaving, never." For the first time, Cheryl believed him completely, not just with her head, but with her heart, with every part of herself that had been broken and was learning to trust again. 3 months later, on a Saturday evening in early December, when the first snow of the season was just starting to fall, Cheryl's apartment smelled like garlic and tomato sauce, and something else she hadn't smelled in years. Home. Not the home she'd built alone out of necessity and grit and stubborn determination, but home the way it was supposed to feel, full and warm and complete. Like all the pieces had finally found their place. "Dad, you're doing it wrong." Jack laughed from the kitchen, where Jerry was attempting to help with dinner, and failing somewhat spectacularly. "You have to stir constantly or it'll stick to the bottom." "I am stirring constantly," Jerry protested, wielding the wooden spoon like it might attack him at any moment. "This is constant stirring. That's occasional stirring at best." Jack grabbed the spoon with the confidence of a child who'd been helping his mother cook for years. "Watch, like this. See? Constant motion." Cheryl leaned against the doorframe, watching them with a heart so full it ached. Jerry in her kitchen, no longer in suits but in jeans and a faded sweater with a small paint stain from when they'd repainted Jack's room last month, sleeves rolled up, taking instruction from a 6-year-old like it was the most natural thing in the world. 3 months ago, this scene would have felt impossible, like a fantasy she didn't dare let herself imagine. Now it felt inevitable, like this was always where they were meant to end up. "How's it going in here?" she asked, moving to check the garlic bread in the oven. "Dad almost burned the sauce," Jack reported cheerfully, stirring with exaggerated care. "I was distracted," Jerry defended himself with a grin. Jack was explaining quantum entanglement. "He's 6. He's smarter than me. It's humbling." Jerry's smile was genuine, filled with pride in his son. "Did you know he's reading at a 4th grade level now? His teacher told me yesterday." "You went to parent-teacher conferences?" Cheryl's voice held surprise. "Of course. It was on the calendar." Said so simply, like it was obvious, like there was nowhere else he would have been. Jack beamed, stirring the sauce with careful precision. This version of her son, confident, happy, secure, thriving, still took Cheryl's breath away sometimes. The walls he'd built around his heart had come down slowly, brick by brick, with every promise Jerry kept. And Jerry had kept them all. Every Saturday. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening. Every school event. Science fair. Soccer game. And random Wednesday afternoon, when Jack just wanted to show him a new drawing or robot design. Jerry showed up. No excuses. No meetings too important. No company crisis that mattered more than being present. The board had initially balked at Jerry's reduced role, threatened consequences, made demands. Jerry had responded by promoting his COO to CEO and stepping into a chairman position that let him guide strategy without drowning in operations. The company's stock had briefly dipped when the news broke, then stabilized and actually grown when investors realized Jerry Arnold's strategic vision didn't require 60-hour workweeks to be effective. Some people said he'd given up too much, sacrificed too much of his empire. Jerry said he'd finally found what actually mattered. After dinner, a surprisingly edible pasta that Jerry only messed up twice, which was progress, they played cards at the small kitchen table that had somehow become the center of their family life. Jack taught them a complicated game he'd learned at school, making up rules when he forgot the real ones, laughing when they caught him cheating. "That's not how this game works," Cheryl accused, pointing at his suspiciously perfect hand. "It is now," Jack grinned with mischief in his eyes. "New rules. I'm the dealer, I can do what I want. You can't just make up new rules as you go." "Why not?" "Dad makes up new rules at his company all the time." Jerry laughed, not the polished chuckle he used in interviews, but a real laugh that came from somewhere deep and genuine and unguarded. The sound of it made something warm bloom in Cheryl's chest every time she heard it. This was what she'd wanted for Jack. What she'd tried to give him alone but couldn't, this ease, this wholeness, this sense of belonging to something bigger than just the two of them fighting against the world. But more than that, and this was the part that both scared and thrilled her, it was what she'd wanted for herself. A partner, someone to share the weight with, someone who looked at her across a table full of cards and made up rules, and saw not just Jack's mother, but her, Cheryl. The woman she'd been before exhaustion and single parenthood had buried that person. Around 9, Jack started yawning between hands, his eyes heavy despite his protests, his movements slowing. "Bedtime," Cheryl announced gently. "5 more minutes?" Jack pleaded with the universal child's prayer. "You said that 20 minutes ago," Jerry pointed out with a smile, ruffling Jack's hair. "Come on, buddy. You've got a big day tomorrow." They'd planned a trip to the Science Museum, all 3 of them. Another weekend tradition that had developed naturally, like breathing, like family. Jack went to get ready for bed without much protest, his energy finally depleted. When he came back out in his rocket ship pajamas, He hugged Cheryl goodnight with fierce affection, then turned to Jerry. "You'll be here tomorrow?" Jack asked, and he still asked sometimes, even though Jerry always was. Old habits of protecting himself died slowly, leaving traces. 7 a.m. sharp, Jerry promised, without hesitation. "I'll bring the good donuts. The ones with sprinkles?" "The ones with sprinkles. And maybe some of those chocolate ones you like." Satisfied, Jack headed to bed. But at his doorway, he paused and looked back with an expression that was becoming increasingly common, pure contentment. "Dad?" Jerry's head came up immediately, and the word "still" did that to him, made him stop everything, made his full attention snap into focus like nothing else could. "Yeah, buddy. Thanks for staying." Simple words, but they carried weight, acknowledgement of the promise kept every single day, the fear overcome, the choice made consistently to be present. "Thanks for letting me," Jerry said, his voice rough with emotion. "Best decision I ever made." After Jack's door closed and the sound of his breathing became steady and peaceful, Cheryl started cleaning up the kitchen. Jerry helped without being asked, another rhythm they'd fallen into over 3 months. He washed, she dried, moving around each other in the small space, with the ease of practice, of partnership, of something that was becoming more than co-parenting. "He's different now," Cheryl said quietly, carefully drying a plate. Lighter somehow. Like he's not carrying the weight of that question anymore. "What question?" "Why wasn't I enough to make my dad stay?" She set the plate in the cabinet with gentle precision. It's the question every kid with an absent parent asks themselves. Jack just finally got an answer that had nothing to do with his worth. Jerry's hands stilled in the soapy water, gripping a plate too tightly. "I did that to him. Made him question his worth. Because I wasn't there to show him he mattered." "You can't change the past." Cheryl took the plate he was holding, dried it carefully. "But you're changing his future. That's what matters. That's what he'll remember, not the absence, but the return. Not the missing years, but the present ones." They finished the dishes in comfortable silence that felt full rather than empty. Moved to the living room, where Jack had abandoned a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table earlier. Jerry sat on the couch, started working on the edges piece by piece with focused concentration. Cheryl curled into the armchair, watching him with a heart that was learning to be hopeful again. "You know what I realized today?" Jerry said, not looking up from the puzzle. "This is the first Saturday in 7 years I haven't checked my work email even once. That's probably not good for the company. The company is fine. Better than fine, they don't need me hovering anymore." He placed a corner piece with a satisfying click. "But Jack needs me. You need me. And for the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Cheryl pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "You say that now. But what happens in a year? 2 years? What happens when this becomes routine instead of exciting?" "Then it becomes routine." Jerry looked up at her finally, and his expression was peaceful in a way she'd never seen. "Cheryl, I'm not here for the excitement. I'm here because coming home to you two feels more right than anything I ever built before. Because Jack's laugh matters more than any board meeting. Because your smile when I do something right makes me happier than any deal I ever closed." The words hung between them, heavy with implication and promise, and feelings neither had fully named yet. "I don't know what the future looks like," Cheryl whispered, and this was the truth she'd been afraid to speak. Jerry set down the puzzle piece in his hand, with careful deliberation, stood up slowly, moved to sit on the arm of her chair, close but not crowding, giving her space to breathe. "I just know I want to be in it," he said quietly, and his voice carried absolute certainty. "In whatever way you'll let me." Cheryl looked up at him, at this man who'd broken her heart and spent 3 months proving he'd learned how to handle it more carefully. This father who'd shown up for his son every single day without fail. This person who'd chosen them over empires and stock prices, and everything he'd once thought mattered. She thought about the letters she'd written and never sent, filled with longing and pain and moments he'd missed. She thought about the years she'd spent protecting Jack from disappointment, building walls to survive. She thought about how those walls had kept them safe but also kept them isolated. And she thought about Jack's face tonight, light and free and whole in a way he'd never been before. Maybe some walls deserved to come down. She reached out slowly, giving herself time to change her mind, and took Jerry's hand. His breath caught at the contact. But he stayed still, letting her control this moment. "One day at a time," she said softly, but there was less fear in her voice now, more possibility. "One day at a time," he agreed, and his smile was small but genuine and full of hope. They sat there as the apartment quieted around them, as the city sounds outside grew distant, as the first snow of winter fell past the window in soft white flakes that caught the streetlight. From down the hall, they could hear Jack's soft snoring, the sound of a child sleeping peacefully, no longer afraid his father would disappear before morning, no longer wondering if he was worth staying for. "He asked me last week if we were going to get married," Cheryl said suddenly, surprising herself. Jerry went very still. "What did you tell him?" "That grown-ups are complicated, that we're figuring things out, that some things take time." She squeezed his hand. "He said that's fine, but could you at least stay forever? Because he likes having you around." "Smart kid." Jerry's voice was rough with emotion. "He gets that from me. I don't doubt it." He paused then. "For the record, I would stay forever. I mean, if you wanted me to. When you're ready. If you're ever ready." Cheryl's heart did something complicated in her chest, fear and hope and possibility all tangled together. "Jerry, I'm not asking, not yet, not until you're ready." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the touch gentle and patient. "I'm just saying, whenever you are ready, if you ever are, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm building a life that includes you and Jack at the center, not the margins." She looked at him, really looked at him in the soft light of her living room. This man who'd shown up at a school assembly and changed everything. This father who'd learned what actually mattered. This person who was choosing them every single day. "One day at a time," she said again. But this time it sounded less like a boundary and more like a promise. "One day at a time," he agreed. They sat there in the quiet of her small living room, hands joined, breathing synchronized, watching snowflakes fall past the window. Down the hall, Jack slept secure in the knowledge that his father would be there in the morning. In the kitchen, dishes dried in the rack from a meal they'd made together. On the coffee table, an unfinished puzzle waited for tomorrow. Nothing was perfect. The apartment was still small. Money was still sometimes tight despite Jerry's help. They still had hard conversations ahead about what their future looked like. Cheryl still had moments where old fears whispered that this couldn't last. But Jack was happy. Really, truly, deeply happy. And Jerry was here, really, truly, consistently here. And Cheryl was learning slowly, carefully, hopefully to believe in second chances. They weren't perfect, and the road ahead wasn't certain. There would be more challenges, more doubts to overcome, more moments when they'd have to choose each other again. But for the first time in years, their family had a beginning instead of an ending. And that was enough. For now, that was more than enough. You know what this story is really about? It's about showing up. Not once, not when it's convenient, but every single day. It's about understanding that the things we build, companies, careers, empires, mean nothing compared to the people we love. Jerry spent 7 years chasing success and found it empty. But he spent 3 months being present and found everything that mattered. If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances, in people who finally understand what matters, in families that rebuild themselves stronger, subscribe to this channel, because we all deserve stories that remind us what's actually worth fighting for. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone chasing the wrong things, someone who walked away and wants to come back, someone who's learning to trust again, share this with them. Sometimes we all need reminded that it's never too late to choose what actually matters. Leave a comment telling me, what would you choose? The empire or the family? Because that choice, that's what defines us.